overheat. Jet pipe, overheat. Fuel bay, overheat. Anti-ice duct, cell call. Config autopilot. Jet pipe, overheat. Jet pipe, overheat. Fuel bay, overheat. Anti-ice duct, cell call. Wing, overheat. Wing, overheat. Disagree. Nose door, disagree. Moving air. Config autopilot.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to On Air with the Chair Live. I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening as we're going to be covering a number of hot topics and industry trends. Before we get into tonight's discussion, though, we are going to... Who's going to... Wait a minute. Okay, I'm sorry. Before we get into tonight's discussion... I knew I was going to get tongue-tied at least once.
Yeah, there it is.
Yep, there it is. Before we get into tonight's discussion, though, and the Q&A, we are going to give all of you guys a briefing on different topics and different items. Remember, when it is time to email your questions for the show, you can email them to edvonair@alpa.org, or you can call 612-662-9825. I do know that we have a caller in the queue right now. You might want to just hang up for a little bit and call back in later. I just don't want to see you sitting online too long. Now, before we get into the briefing, let's go ahead and do some quick introductions. Most of you already know who I am, but for the new pilots just joining us for the first call, my name is Nick James, and I'm the Endeavor MEC Chairman. I'm also on the Collective Bargaining Committee at Alpa National. Jade?
I am Jay Chewy. I'm a FTI PCP in the training department. I am the EDV Secretary Treasurer, and I'm on the National Safer Committee.
I'm Adam Spurrier. I'm a captain on paper until they ever schedule my OE. I'm also, for now, the Secretary-Treasurer for Minneapolis Council 129. I'm on the negotiating committee, and I'm the chairman of the National Fee for Departure Committee.
Victoria?
Hey guys, my name's Victoria. I'm the new executive assistant, and I'm fairly new to the 121 life, but I do have a little bit of legal background, and I worked 135 prior to this, so I'm excited to be here and ready to help.
Excellent. And I think we're going to bring Carl in. Most of you know Carl.
Hello, I'm Carl Wozmiak, Senior Labor Relations Counsel for ALPA, assigned to Endeavor.
Excellent. Thanks, Carl. So tonight's briefing, we're going to start off with Jade Shiwi. Jade is going to be giving you some trends inside the training department, including OE. Then Adam Spurrier is going to follow up with some fee for departure industry trends, and he's going to talk a little bit about our most recent contract survey that just went out. We hope you participate in that. And then, of course, I'm going to end the briefing with the discussion that I had today with Delta and Patrick Burns. So for now, Jade, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Nick. So the big thing in the SIM department right now, we're experiencing a bunch of change. We have new construction going on. That construction is going to entail also going into 8 total SIMs that are going to be at CAE. Now, those will be 8 Endeavor CAE SIMs. That's not going to include, there's 2 other spaces that CAE is going to have to be able to bring in other simulators. There's talk about possibly putting a 7.3 sim for CAE that's in a box sitting here in Minneapolis, and another CAE sim they're putting in where we're building our 2 new sims. They're going to put in 1 more pad. It's easier to build it now, and possibly bringing in another 900 sim that will be just CAE. Sorry about that. Now, why does that count? Well, possibly Endeavor's looking at bringing in the ATP CTP course in-house, so they'll have that capability with all the new sim availability to have that in. All of our students will be doing it here in Minneapolis and getting training from local instructors. That is all supposed to be, the 8 sims should be all completed by the end of the year. Also by the end of the year, we're looking at moving the entire training department, that is flight ops, that is also in flight, over to the CAE facility. There's full construction. We're even going to see some of the managers all move over there and have all their offices all under one facility. Currently, within all of our new hires, we're still hanging around that 2% washout rate. I get phone calls frequently asking, how is it? What's it going? That fluctuates month to month, but on average, when you're looking at an entire year, it sticks around 2%. With the new hire classes are typically anywhere between 10 to 16 students per class. They're fluctuating that number based upon the current captains we have. The more captains we get, whether it's off the street captains or more upgrades we have, they're influxing the new hires to match our current levels. So in the staffing department in the FTI ranks, we're still a little fat. We're heavy. They say currently somewhere between 10 and 15, depending on the month they're looking at. But with the attrition to Delta and other airlines, they're saying that in the next couple months, it should match up to their current levels. They're not looking at hiring any more FTIs by the end of the year. So that level should stay. If they hire any, it's going to be based on extra attrition that they're going to see. So LCP and OE updates. So LCPs, they're currently looking at 4 LCPs. If you're interested, any captain over 250 hours, reach out, Matt Morris. He'll take any 200 or 900 LCP. Currently, they have 106 LCPs qualified with 46 in the pipeline to get trained. Now, they're at various levels within the pipeline to complete training. For that training, what they've been doing is they've been doing what they call the Rochester Express. They've been flying an airplane between Minneapolis and Rochester daily to make sure all these LCPs get checked out with the FAA jump seating and doing some of those FAA rides on that flight. OE wait times, currently on the 200, there is no wait time on the 200 at all. 900, it's been fluctuating just in the high 40s to low 50s, depending upon when those LCPs are getting trained up and out on the line. That being said, if you are in OE, you can get moved up. We've had some of these calls on how we get moved up. When I talked to OE scheduling today, they said the people that are most likely to get moved up is if you're in differences, or if you're a return to work, or if you're a current LCP, you can expect your OE time to get moved up. OE scheduling says if you need to know, if you want to go out of country, you can reach out to them. But that 50 days, I would cut that in half, right? You're only not available if they say, hey, 50 days. Expect in 25 days to be available is what they said, just in case anything changes, make sure you're available for that. That's all I have for you, Nick. I'm going to turn it back over. I think we're going to go to Adam.
Thank you, Jade. And yeah, it's sounds like quite a bit of a wait still for me. I'm at, I want to say, about 5.5 weeks right now. So I'm just spending my lovely free time here with you guys on a nice night like this while I'm waiting. First and foremost, you may have seen a barrage of emails from us in the last few days covering the negotiating survey, which did go live today. This was at the request and direction of our MEC back at the May MEC meeting in Detroit. We were directed with putting together a negotiating priorities survey to distribute to the pilot group so that we can set our bargaining priorities, not only over the near term in response to obviously some changes in the regional industry, but to where we want to go as an MEC and what direction we want to set in negotiations over the next several years. This survey is expected to take you about 15 to 20 minutes. I believe there's only 3 required demographic questions. The rest is highly encouraged to fill out, as well as those text box, so that we can get accurate feedback from you guys as far as what direction to take in our negotiations. Beyond the negotiating survey, obviously, there's sort of a $428 an hour elephant in the room about the American wholly owned pay scales right now. Obviously, they did also get some other contract improvements in addition to that, but there is a glaring discrepancy in pay between the American wholly owned carriers and Endeavor right now. Essentially, what's happened over the last few months, as Nick likes to talk about, is what's known as pattern bargaining, where we see something happen at our carrier or their carrier and vice versa, and there's a escalated response going from there. Most recently, we, back in March, rolled out LOA 130 and 131, which covered our contract improvements, as well as the $110,000 retention program. In response, the American wholly owns had some of their own contract improvements, as well as a fairly significant pay scale override for the next at least 2 years for their carriers. We have heard a lot of feedback. We do know this is on a lot of pilots' minds on why this is not a response that Endeavor or Delta has reacted to yet. Really, we're just sort of in different places right now between the carriers. We view as an MEC that this is going to be a problem that we will be addressing really, or experiencing in the near future, these types of attrition levels that the American wholly owned properties experienced. Envoy, for example, I know in May lost in the ballpark of 105 to 110 pilots in 1 month alone. We're not quite at that point, but we have been pretty candid with our management that this is the direction we see things going, and we think that ultimately there will need to be some sort of negotiated response at Endeavor. What that ends up being or what it materializes as or when that happens, it's really anyone's guess right now. As Nick will talk about later, we believe that there is a solution that'll work more effectively than just monetary amounts, but that's not quite the path that Delta or Endeavor has been ready to engage on yet. On the United Express side of the industry, back around, I want to say 3 to 4 months ago, the Aviate Flow program was announced. This is a little bit different than what the American and Delta Flow programs look like, where it's not a guaranteed and contractual program, but instead it is a sort of combined list across multiple different airlines where they will eventually be able to move on to United Mainline. We were hoping to see a little bit more firm or contractual program out of the United Express carriers as part of that pattern bargaining. But I believe this is a good incremental step towards getting guaranteed and contractual progression, as well as mainline seniority and longevity across the fee-for-departure industry, which that does bring me to the Canadian carriers, which are also a part of ALPA National. This is something not a lot of pilots know, but of the 2 ALPA fee-for-departure Canadian carriers, Jazz and Encore, Encore is a bit of a unique situation with their mainline partner WestJet, where they are one seniority list across 2 airlines and 2 MECs. So they experience a little bit different problems than we do in the States. It's a very different labor market in Canada. However, they experience a lot of the same issues with retention. The Encore MEC got a retention bonus program offered by their airline, which was $10,000 over, I want to say, 3 years. In light of the deals that happened at Endeavor and the American wholly owns, they did turn that down. So there's some of the same pressures going on up north of the border as we're experiencing here, but I believe this is a case point of showing that a seniority and longevity system can work between a mainline partner and their fee-for-departure carrier, where essentially you're hired at WestJet or Encore, whether you're going to fly the Dash 8 like Nick did back in the day, or fly the 7-3 or the Dreamliner. You are on one fluid seniority list between the two carriers, even though it's two separate airlines and two MECs. So there's certainly some room for change in the industry, and as mainline hiring continues, as there's increased pressure on the regional carriers, it's inevitably, in my opinion, going to trend towards that direction, like we see in Canada right now. As far as the final fee-for-departure piece that I would like to touch on, for those of you who know, there's a biannual, if I'm pronouncing that right, every other year, board of directors meeting that takes place at ALPA National. Every other one of those, so every fourth year is an election year, which is what we're going to be under right now. So if there's any sort of priorities, that sort of thing that you want represented at a national level, please reach out to your LEC reps and your local councils across your different bases to let them know about that. This is something that we want to come in as a strong, unified voice in the fee-for-departure segment. All in all, we roughly contain about 12,500 members across the fee-for-departure carriers, which is essentially the size of a legacy airline if we were combined. So we make up a fairly significant part of the industry when we're together, and of course, under ALPA, we should be focused on one voice and one mission statement at the end of the day. Last little soapbox before I turn it back over to Nick here. There's a election going on in both Minneapolis and New York right now. These are both for Secretary Treasurer positions. This is something fairly near and dear to me, since that is how I got my start in ALPA work. Currently in Minneapolis, this is the nomination round, which ends August 10th at 5 p.m. Eastern. The two candidates receiving the most nominations from this round will proceed to the final election. As of right now, there is not anyone who declared themselves willing to serve in this position. You can still rate yourself in if you really want to. Mixed success rates on that, I've been told. But if you write your ALPA number in and get other people to do that for you, you can ultimately win that election. As far as New York, this also closes on August 10th. However, that's at 10 in the morning Eastern time. And this is the final round of voting for this position, meaning the person who receives the most votes for this election will be the next Secretary Treasurer for New York Council 157. Over to Nick.
By mixed success, I think you wrote yourself in, voted for yourself, and won the election 1-0. So you can actually have a lot of success as a write-in candidate. Before I get to my briefing, I'm going to actually swing it right back over to Jade. There was one topic that we wanted to brief the pilot group on before we move on.
Yeah, so I missed it on mine. I didn't put it in my notes, but we're going to do a pub event in New York at a Mets game. We have 2 suites available at the Mets Stadium for September 27th. Gates open at 5:10. Game starts at 7:10. We have 100 tickets available. You'll see a comm that goes out. So we would like you, please, to try to bid that off if you would like to come to the game in New York. With that being said, you cannot be on reserve or be on a work period and try to come to the game at that time. So right now, it's just going to be for pilots only. If we do have extra tickets, we do open it up to +1. And from there, we'll have a link after the bids close. Our wonderful comms team out here that's helping us out, we'll have a link out and we'll set it up. First come, first serve for the first 100 tickets.
Thank you, Jade. And before I do my briefing, I'd also like to give a shout out to the comms team. We have some wonderful individuals that are behind the scenes with a bunch of wires, computers, soundboards, and cameras that are making this live call happen. We do appreciate all their efforts, and thank you so much, comms team. Appreciate it. Now, I'm sure that most of you have probably wanted to tune into this call to understand what transpired between the Patrick Burns and Delta meeting today. We had that call at 1 p.m. Central, and on that call was myself, Captain Jason Ambrosi, the Delta MEC chairman, Steve Mayer, the vice chairman, Jim Graham, our CEO, and Patrick Burns, who is a VP of Flight Ops and the system chief pilot. I'm going to just kind of talk to you about how the call went, what our talking points were, what we were trying to champion and push for. And really where it started was the same place I've started with Jim Graham, with Jason Ambrosi, and even with the pilots. Before we even start talking about a solution, we first have to address what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And in order to address that problem, we have to understand what is Delta's overall plan for the DCI network and where does Endeavor fit into that plan? Because before we can go into that solution-driven, ideology, we have to understand what their goals are. For instance, if their goal is to maintain the DCI network, that may require a different solution than if their goal is to shrink the DCI network. Remember, Delta is the least dependent upon their regional feed compared to American or United because they operate fewer hulls and they are the smallest carrier. And that is something that we need to be cognizant of as we try to search for solutions. The other thing that's unique about Delta is they have the RJ killers, and the RJ killers are the 717 and the A220s, and the latter of which they have increased their orders on. So again, this is also something that we have to be cognizant of because unlike American and United, they could more easily upgauge flying into mainline, which ultimately we would like to see. But we don't want it to cost us opportunities here as that transition happens. So I first posed that question to the team. And the response back that we got was that Delta is committed to the DCI network and to operate right around 275 aircraft through 2030 on the dual-class side. However, they didn't specify what percentage of dual-class aircraft Endeavor will be operating. Remember, our fleet guarantee only covers 109 dual-class aircraft and does not cover any single-class aircraft. To put things in perspective for the pilots of Endeavor, prior to the pandemic, we were operating somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 185 single and dual-class aircraft. Post-pandemic, as we've tried to recover, we are operating somewhere right around 145, but our fleet guarantee only provides us 109. So in other words, if they wanted to shrink and upgauge at mainline, or if they wanted to shrink Endeavor and find another partner in the DCI network, or provide hulls to SkyWest or Republic, per our contract, they do have the ability to do so down to 109 aircraft. And that presents some, exposure, some risk exposure for the pilots of Endeavor. Now, you guys have seen the attrition numbers, and they have been steadily climbing. We hit record numbers of attrition in June. We followed 74 in June with in the mid-60s in July, and we're trending probably along the same lines for August. We also know that they're going to unmeter approximately 25 pilots that have been metered through their OTS and CJO processes in September and October. And so we do expect those numbers to maintain the levels that we're currently seeing, if not possibly increase. We're also starting to receive some unconfirmed but anecdotal reports that hiring might be softening as well. So this gives you a recipe for a shrinking airline. And as you guys have seen, our seniority list is shrinking. Now, if you listen to the Jim Graham podcast, which was the most recent podcast that was released, Jim said, yes, but we are still in an advantageous position because we are shrinking at a slower rate than our competitors of SkyWest and Republic. Unfortunately, though, we are still shrinking. We are parking aircraft and we are losing pilots at rates that are unsustainable for the fleet size that we're currently operating. We're watching 200s fly out to the desert, and that means less upgrade opportunities. Yes, for the foreseeable future, anybody that reaches their 1,000 hours will be able to upgrade, but at some point in time, we're going to reach a balance point where a first officer that has the 1,000 hours isn't going to be able to upgrade. They are going to have to start waiting. Our upgrade times are going to increase, and losing hulls only exacerbates us and actually hastens us to that eventuality. So that is something that we need to consider. Now, I also highlighted with Patrick Burns and Jim Graham that our success of the past has been driven by the fact that we have an industry-leading contract, or I should say had an industry-leading contract. Since 2014, the Endeavor contract has led in pay rates, work rules, retirement. The only piece that we were missing was that career progression piece, which we were able to solidify in 125, and then solidify for future Endeavor pilots in 129. The problem that we're facing here now is that we have been firmly supplanted not just by one, but three other carriers. And the three carriers that have leapfrogged us in terms of pay and benefits also have that career progression plan. So how do we maintain a competitive advantage? Because that competitive advantage in the pilot labor market is exactly what has allowed us to win for the Endeavor brand, for the Delta brand, for the Delta customer, and for the Delta revenue stream. And so it's really important to tie those pieces together for Delta to say, if we're going to maintain our competitive advantage, we need to be competitive in that pilot labor market. And what does that solution look like? Now, here's what I will tell you my takeaways from the meeting were. I'm not convinced that Patrick Burns or Delta recognizes the impending problem that we have here. Now, as I say that, you have to remember this could just be a bargaining tactic. They don't necessarily want to show that there needs to be a solution here because they may view that as a point of weakness at the bargaining table. This really wasn't a bargaining session, however, as much as it was, let's identify problems and possible solutions. We do believe that the number one solution and the reason that you are leaving is because we don't have that advanced seniority and longevity accrual system. If we could address why pilots are leaving, which is that reason, then you are more likely to stay. This is the same conversation that I had with Jim and was reiterated today again on the call as far as what transpired last August when we eventually started to go down the monetary path. We said, look, we can take a monetary solution, such as retention, which is what we did, but Delta risks paying twice in the future if the monetary solution proves not to be enough. And that's exactly what has happened. The monetary solution has proven not to be enough. Not because it didn't necessarily change pilot bidding behavior here. We had really good participation rates, at least on the captain side, but we were immediately leapfrogged less than 2 months later, again, by three separate carriers. And so the market moved against Delta rather than Delta controlling the market. And we do believe if we can get to a seniority-based system, that will allow Delta to control the market, which is going to be really, really important moving forward. Now, where does the Delta MEC fit into all of these discussions? Because in order to get a seniority longevity-based system, the Delta MEC has to agree to that. The Delta MEC's number one objective, their number one priority, is to bring all of the aircraft and pilots to mainline. And I can't emphasize that enough. That is their number one objective. Are they willing to entertain different styles, different solutions, and different counter proposals? Absolutely. And they are on board with trying to find a way to make a seniority longevity-based system happen at Endeavor. However, it is important to note, and Jason did, I think, a great job, Jason Ambrosi, Delta MEC chairman, did a wonderful job highlighting the fact that there needs to be something of tangible value for the Delta pilots. And right now, that tangible value exists inside Section 6. We do believe that the best place to unlock this would be Section 6 and use that as a mechanism and a tool to close out a deal that represents the Delta pilots very well as Endeavor. If the Delta pilots can win and the Endeavor pilots can win, but Endeavor and Delta management also win with a solution that they need, then that's the kind of synergies that we're looking to create on that. Jason was excellent on the call, and I really, really appreciated him being there. Now, what are the next steps after this meeting? Because that's really what is probably going to be most of focus for the pilots. I certainly wanted to try to secure a secondary meeting that expanded the table and brought the negotiating committees, the attorneys, and the subject matter experts in play so that we could start brainstorming different ideas and passing proposals back and forth. Patrick wants to take a few moments and circle back with Jim Graham and have some internal discussions before committing to any further discussions at this point. And so he is going to get back with us in the not too distant future, because both Jason and I said time is of the essence. He's going to get back to us in the not too distant future. And my hope from that is that we would see another meeting take place with, again, expanded teams and different goals from that meeting. However, for now, what are your takeaways as a pilot? and this is what I want to be clear on, and this is what I was clear on with my last MEC chairman's update. We do believe that there will be a solution that will have to be driven to Endeavor in order to help us stabilize and grow. We just don't know when that solution is going to happen, and we don't know what that solution is going to look like because Delta has been very unclear what the future specifically for Endeavor is going to be. What we do know right now is that we are a shrinking airline, and I am unconvinced that Delta and Patrick Burns understand how quickly that solution needs to be put in place if we are going to be able to turn the ship around in the near term. And so when you talk about making career decisions, and even Patrick Burns said this on the live call or on our call today, he said, each pilot has to make decisions that are going to be best for them and best for their careers and best for their families. And I have to reiterate that point to you as well. I can't predict, again, when we're going to get to a solution or what that solution is going to look like. If they want to shrink down to 109 aircraft, then they would have the ability to buy themselves some time before implementing a solution. If they want to turn the mechanism around immediately, we would need to get into talks very, very soon. I hope to have more details for you a little bit later, maybe in the next week or two, once I hear back from Patrick and Jim. But at this point, that is where we are at as far as the meeting was concerned. Now, where does that bring us? Because we are focused on seniority and longevity, but that may not be the only solution out there. Other solutions could be monetary, they could be work rule driven, they could be soft credit, they could be a combination thereof. We're open to discussing all sorts of alternatives. That was one thing that I thought was curious during the call today as well, is when Delta stated that they weren't convinced that seniority is needed at this point in time. I said, that's okay, but then we need to talk about alternatives, but no alternatives were given. And so that was also something that I thought was a little curious. Now, just to touch one more thing on the seniority front, Patrick did ask, what would you envision a seniority program to look like? And I said, well, again, we need to understand the goals. Patrick was very clear that there may be a need to do it over the next 2 or 3 years, but certainly he does not want to implement a 10-year solution for a short-term problem. And so is there a way to figure out how we can do seniority today, but maybe wean off of seniority at a later date? And I said, look, if we're talking about those types of things, that's a different conversation and pretty easy to handle. And I do think that there's an opportunity to do that. The last thing that I want to touch on as far as seniority is concerned is the protected rights or senior pilots. I have heard from a few senior pilots that have asked, hey, if you do a seniority and longevity-based system, am I going to be included in that? The answer is yes, but there's a catch to it. The seniority and longevity-based system will be a standalone LOA, and there are two components to really executing on a seniority and longevity-based system. It's A, the seniority accrual, and then B, the movement piece. And they are two separate pieces. We are not necessarily looking to create a new way to get to Delta. We are simply looking to create a new benefit when you get to Delta under the existing movement programs, which is LOA 125, LOA 129, or the off-the-street process. And so they would be able to participate in a seniority-based system. They would just have to participate via off the street. Now, for the pilots that I have spoken with that have a desire to possibly get another opportunity to flow or participate in the CAP program, if we have an opportunity to do that doesn't negatively impact the pilots that haven't had their first bite at the apple, we'll certainly look to do that. But it's not something that we can guarantee is going to happen because, again, the seniority and longevity piece is just that. It's not a movement piece. It's simply an accrual system. And I'm sure if there's more questions as the call goes on, we'll certainly go over those. I think that's just about all that I have on my end as far as the briefing is concerned. However, I'm sure there's going to be a plethora of questions on this topic, and we'll have some time over the next couple of hours to be able to thoroughly answer all of those questions. For now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Peter Ruhlman, our Comms Committee Chairman, who is running the call tonight, because he wants to talk to you about the September 1st picketing event. Peter.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for having me. He's telling you to keep on going.
Oh, okay. I guess we're not quite ready for Peter. That's not a problem. Derek, I'm not really sure what you're going to want me to talk about at this point, but we can buy ourselves a little bit of time. And now Peter's gone. There you go.
Nick, I appreciate you having me. I've been enjoying getting on the On Air with the Chair podcast with you for quite some time. It's been a very nice project to do, and now I'm on the other side of the table of this live stream, and you're right, it feels much different. It feels much different. But yes, I'd like to talk a little bit about the International Day of Informational Picketing that Alpa National is putting together on September 1st. Now, I got to make it clear, this is not a response to the things that Nick just had mentioned. This is something that's been planned for a long time, and it's many different Alpa properties getting together to discuss and share public information about how we can improve not only our benefits but quality of life and things like that. So our MEC has decided to participate in 3 locations in Minneapolis, Detroit, and New York City. And the neat thing about this is because our goals and Delta MEC's goals line up fairly well, we're actually going to be participating alongside of our fellow Delta pilots here to using their resources. They can kind of guide us in a way, and we can go there, so show our support for ourselves and get the word out. So if you're interested in that, you're going to see a comm coming out within the next week or so with ways to sign up. If you're in one of the bases that we're not actively participating in, I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you have any questions about how to participate in another base, throw us a dart. There's a new dart category now called September 1st Picketing Event. And if you are interested in participating in another base, feel free to go ahead and let us know, and I can coordinate you on where to do that as well. But we look forward to your participation. I can never say that word. And yeah, appreciate it, Nick. That's all that I have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter, and thank you for that wonderful information. We hope that you join us out there for the picketing event if you have some time off. I actually joined a couple of the Delta picketing events, and it is a great show of unity and a great show of support. All right, so we are done with the briefing portion of tonight's call, just a little over 30 minutes, so that's actually pretty good. So we're actually going to start the Q&A portion. Remember, you can email questions to the show via edvonair@alpa.org. Or you can text/call 612-662-9825. We're going to let you know when we're ready for the live phone call questions, but first we're going to go through a series of email questions before we open up the phone lines. Please remember, we're happy to cover any topics regarding negotiations, the Delta meeting, current staffing levels, attrition, hiring, but we do want to keep the questions relative to the pilot group in general. If you have a very individualized and specific inquiry, please make sure that you reach out to your LEC representative through the ALPA phone tree at 833-EDV-ALPA. All right. Do you want me to read this, Peter? Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. All right, when you get onto the phone, please make sure that you are muting the viewing device that you are listening the call to, as the phone audio will interfere with that. The phone line, again, is 612-662-9825, and press *1 to ask a question. Phone callers will also hear an audible sound when they are on air with the chair, and that will be your cue to start asking us your question. You can also email questions to edvonair@alpa.org. All right, Jade, Adam, who wants to take the first question?
Can go for it here, sure. First question is from Minneapolis 200 Captain Mark Rassler. Mark writes, the last LOA, there were agreements for trip and duty rigs. I know that the agreement allowed for several months for the implementation. However, it did allow for early adoption. Perhaps, if known, updates could be given on how those are progressing towards implementing. I know that several times the company has shared they're working to get rid of the paper release for... Oh, so this is kind of a two-part question. I'll take the first part here regarding trip and duty rigs. The trip rigs, those were originally slated to begin the middle of September of this year. With the duty rigs set for kind of their must-go live date for June of 2023. There was a little bit of a clause that we gave ourselves in there where if the trip rigs were delayed for whatever reason, that the duty rigs would be moved forward as a sort of catch-up or compensation for our pilots. We did not quite envision the trip rigs coming as early as they did. Personally, it seemed like that was a bit of a goodwill effort on the part of the company with how not great schedule quality, and life out on the line is right now. So that was a little bit of a surprise, really, for everyone in the MEC. During negotiations, we were told, sworn up and down, that the absolute soonest it could come is the fall. There's no way the programming could come sooner, and that us even suggesting trying to get it sooner was not really smiled upon. So it really did come out of the blue for those to come out early. As far as the duty rigs, as soon as we hear something, if those are able to come ahead early, or if there's a separate negotiating opportunity where we can bring those into effect sooner, we absolutely will capitalize that and communicate that with the pilot group. However, at this point in time, it sounds like the middle of June date for duty rigs is still what we're looking at from that end.
I'll take the electronic releases.
Yeah,
Sure.
before you take the electronic releases, though, I do want to highlight something on the trip duty rigs. The trip duty rigs are being programmed at the same time. The reason for the delay on the duty rigs specifically was that was what was negotiated in LOA 131. Remember, the company didn't even want to do a duty rig. And when we looked at the cost of a trip and duty rig, the trip rig actually was about 75% of the cost, which is why we needed to implement that sooner than the duty rig. But then the company pushed back and said, we're not interested in doing the duty rig at all. We felt that if we tried to go for dual implementation of both a trip and duty rig, the company may have pushed back on something like, we want to increase the new hire bonus to even more than $40,000, or we want permanent control of that rather than temporary control. And so what we did was we landed in a space where we implemented the duty rig 9 months after the trip rig, 15 months after the date of signing. That allowed us a permanent contractual gain without having to give, well, even though it was delayed, but without having to give anything on the other side. And so really that is the reason that you're seeing that delay. Jade?
Yeah, so when I talked to Dave Wilson and Doug Hadley about electronic releases. The latest on electronic releases, there's one company that they had been working with on electronic releases. Well, when they did that, they had it redone. They didn't have the signature. All the programming has been delayed and delayed and delayed. Well, we're hoping, the company said, they're hoping, again, hope as a business strategy for someone else, that those electronic releases will be ready to come out by the end of the year. That's kind of what the new team that's programming it is kind of forecasting, as it will be at the end of the year this year, at least out for in the testing phase, if not first quarter next year.
Do you want?
I'll take this one. And thanks, Jade. The next question is also from Captain Mark Rassler, 200 Minneapolis driver. As a 200 driver, the many IROPs the company has faced over the past year hasn't really affected me. However, having experienced them in the past, I know how frustrating IROPs can be. I know that all the challenges that come with an IROP are basically problems for the company to solve. Unfortunately, the company's inability to quickly solve an IROP negatively affects the pilot group and FA group. I have to believe there can be ways in which 9E Endeavor, ALPA, and the pilot group can present solutions and help solve the mutual problem. Has the union or AFA approached the company in the past to try to work together to, sorry, the
If it
camera's
looks
really
like
way
we're
a
playing
bit.
a game of dodgeball,
We're a
the
little-
camera's in front of the TV.
It really
here,
is.
So dip,
to find
dodge,
a
duck,
solutions
dive.
to an IROP when crews are displaced and spend several hours trying to get a hotel room or accommodation. Okay, so basically what this whole thing was, are you doing anything or can anything be done, especially in an irregular operation, to try to get crews into their hotel rooms faster? And the answer is, I don't know that there's really a contractual mechanism that's going to allow that to happen, because when an IROP happens and crews start to get displaced, what has to happen is our third-party contractor, API, has to go to work, and they are one of the largest, if not I think they're the largest hotel vendor that does this. They have to go to work and they have to start rebooking. And rebooking, unfortunately, just takes quite a bit of time. It's a manually intensive process. It's not necessarily automated. And so it does become difficult to get crews into their hotel rooms very, very quickly. That is the downside to it. One thing that is important to note is that if you do take, or if there is an inordinate amount of time that it takes to get you inside your hotel room, you need to make sure that you're proactive and you're still receiving the FAR 117 required rest and the 8 hours behind door. And once your hotel accommodation is given to you, you need to make sure that that is a FAR 117 contractually compliant rest period. So I'll leave it with that.
And the final fork of this question states several months back, maybe a year, the union brought up a discussion about getting new, improved, different fall and winter outer attire, meaning jackets and such. Is there any updates regarding this issue? That has not been circled back to. I believe that was maybe January of 2021 when we last broached it with the company. At that point in time, there was not a interest on the company end of changing the winter outerwear. Being a Minneapolis native myself, this has been one of the hills that I'm probably going to die on at this airline, is that I want a functional piece of outerwear that does not look like a 12-year-old wearing a playground jacket, so to speak, or a leather coat.
You look so young. I think anything we put in you're going to look 12.
Does look bad. It's a problem that I can't shake. So yeah, one personal hill to die on is I would like a functional, more modern piece of outerwear. There was a brief discussion with our Endeavor management on pursuing something like the Delta pilots have, which is essentially like a black pea coat for outerwear. That ultimately didn't end up going anywhere. This was around the same time that they were flirting with trying to exchange mandatory hats for some other aspect of bargaining, and that also went the way of the 200 out to Kingman, meaning kind of off and not seen again. But I would like to see some change on that, but it's not something that's been readdressed with the company.
All right, we got Atlanta 900 FO, Zach Amon. I'm currently a 900 Atlanta FO. It's alarming to see myself and many others who are Atlanta-based on how quickly this base is shrinking in response to supporting the New York markets. With no vacancies posted in Atlanta for quite some time, it makes quality of life and upgrade prospects decrease significantly. Factors like this create a dynamic that can only increase attrition significantly, as you know. One of the obvious solutions to this problem would be to post vacancies in all bases, which would have to result in more front and out back deadheads in and out of New York, but would increase the number of individuals willing to upgrade and curb attrition. To your knowledge, is the company aware of the issue? Are they taking any steps to address this moving forward? So we'll stop there and we'll address that question right there. The company, when they post a vacancy, they post it based upon their needs where they see it. Currently, the needs are in the two markets of New York City and Cincinnati. So that's how they move forward. Now, with those people upgrading into those, they have the ability to backfill or have a secondary position in Atlanta, Minneapolis, one of the other bases, and they can choose or not choose to fill those positions on the company's discretion. Currently, they haven't been, over the last two vacancies, Adam, they haven't been backfilling those positions, meaning they need the pilots in those two locations, and they're not addressing or wanting to build the den heads front and back. You want to add to that?
Yeah, one thing that I'll address on the deadhead piece is the company is obviously going to be worried about synthetic credit because that's going to drive inefficiencies and synthetic credit. So not only is it going to drive costs, it's going to drive headcount. And as you drive headcounts, the required number of pilots that it takes to staff your current amount of flying is going to increase. And so there's some concern, there would be some concern on the company side trying to do that. Now, what I will say, just at least from my aspect of it, is this is something that I have brought up in several meetings, negotiating meetings and otherwise. I actually was talking about this at the ops meeting when we were looking, when we had the topic on Tuesday of what is the state of the Endeavor, future state of Endeavor. And I said, you know, I understand that Delta is very, very New York centered because they get a premium that they don't get anywhere else, and Endeavor performs better in New York than any of the other DCI carriers, and in many respects performs better than Delta mainline. But from a pilot's viewpoint, we are being punished for our own success because it's limiting our opportunities in more preferred domiciles, and that acts exact opposite to a retention deal or to retention of the pilot. So this is something that we've highlighted to the company, but again, this is also something that is within the company's control and not something that they seem to be willing to do or change at this point in time.
Oh, so that pretty much addressed most of it. Next question.
I will probably take this one since it has to do with the meeting. This is from MSP 200 First Officer Chauncey Gannell. In regards to a seniority accrual system at Endeavor, what kind of system did Delta's management seem to have the most interest in? So, In general, we were talking about seniority-based systems, but we did get to a point in time where Patrick Burns said, what do you think that system can look like? And I said, look, it can look like a lot of different things. And I said, I'm going to give you the three main solutions that Jim and I had talked about last August in pursuing those in lieu of what we ended up getting to, which was the monetary solution. Number one, you could absolutely take all 2,000 pilots today and put them on the Delta seniority list, and then for a period of time in the future, any new hire that is hired onto the Endeavor seniority list would receive a Delta seniority number. I mean, that is an option. We understand that that's probably the least palatable option for Delta because they have a concern, of costs, because longevity and seniority is not free. It is, and I have to emphasize that, it is not free. If you go to Delta on year 2, year 3, year 4 pay, that means that their longevity costs are not decreasing as much as if you would have come in on year 1 pay. And so it is not a free system, and it is a system that pays you dividends and costs Delta money every single year for approximately 12 years. So that's something to be considered. They also are going to be concerned about a system like that because they feel like it's going to make them less competitive to the other pipelines that they bring pilots to Delta through. And that includes from the Spirits, the JetBlues, the Frontiers, the Allegiants, and even the Uniteds and Americans. If all of a sudden they feel that for a period of time that Endeavor pilots are going to be leapfrogging, so to speak, the new hire pilots at Delta, does Delta become less desirable? Does Delta become less competitive? The second solution is that you hand out seniority numbers to captains. Now, I already know what the 200 drivers are going to say, but I'm not getting as many hours as the 900 drivers, and that is very true. And so the counter solution to that would be we just tie it to an active months of service. I think that is something that we would be able to accomplish. You would get your seniority number after X amount of active months of service. The third idea is the 20-40 split, though I think that we are way, way beyond a 20-40 split being something that is actually going to be effective. But what I mean by that is that you you flow 20 pilots per month, as the current standard is in LOA 125 and LOA 129, but you would assign 40 seniority numbers. So it gives you kind of an effective doubling of the flow rate while not actually destroying your DCI feed. Now, at this point, I think you're going to have to go far deeper. Is it 2100? Is it 2200? I don't know. We can certainly take a look at that, but that would work to basically effectively shorten your flow time down significantly, because once you have that seniority number, it is unlikely, especially if Delta is your goal, that you're going to go somewhere else. I would say that the two most likely solutions out of the three that I presented are either number 2 or number 3. I don't think that there's really a strong appetite on Delta's part to just take all the pilots that are currently here on property at this moment and assign a seniority number.
Jade, do you want this, or do you want me to grab it?
It's up to you.
All right. This is from New York 900 Captain Travis Walsh. Travis says, I am a senior captain who accepted the retention payment as a backup. However, I have a CJO at another legacy. I'm planning on paying back the bonus and starting at the legacy much earlier than I would flow to Delta. Does it appear that the company is assuming that 100% of captains who accepted retention payments will wait for flow? Or are they accounting for the fact that a good chunk of us are going to pay it back and leave for airlines other than Delta? These sorts of metrics are really out of our hands from the Endeavor MEC. This type of information, we really only get what's shared with us directly through the officers or through an ops meeting. From my recollection during the initial retention negotiations was that the company expectation was that you would see a pilot opt into the retention program and be locked in, so to speak, to the Delta ecosystem or through the regional to mainline network. However, that's obviously not been the case. I know, obviously, it sounds like you, Travis, are going to be leaving for another carrier. I know several other pilots just in the last month alone who've paid back the bonus to go to another carrier. Really, I guess the thing that I would say, and that's on all of our minds, is this is just more negotiating capital for if we end up coming to a future negotiation on that item. The more pilots that leave, inherently, that does drive a bigger wedge in retention here down at Endeavor.
All right, the next question is from Detroit 900 Captain Stephen Camp. I know the ultimate goal is seniority longevity for 9E pilots or absorption to mainline, but absent those things happening, would there be no monetary gain as far as American airline wholly owned type pay rates or additional retention pay for 9E pilots? Only the Delta pilots would see any additional monetary gains. Well, thank you for the question, Stephen. And I think, I covered this with you actually personally probably a few days ago when we spoke one-on-one. It's a little too early to determine whether or not anything would be viable inside a package for the pilots that are currently staying here. And here's why. If seniority and longevity is going to be identified as the number one goal by our pilots in the contract survey that is out, and I have a high degree of confidence that it's going to be, and Delta unlocks that benefit through negotiations by paying the Delta MEC to unlock that, and they bring that system down here and they don't ask us for anything in return, right? This is just to solve their retention problem. They're not asking us for that. I don't know that we would really have the bargaining capital or the leverage to say, well, we're not going to take this seniority-based system that is going to positively affect 1,800 pilots here because we need to also try to leverage American airline pay rates for the pilots that decided to choose protected right status. Remember, you are still going to be able to participate in the seniority longevity-based system because that is one aspect of this program. The other aspect is the movement program, which you could also participate in via off the street. And again, if we have another opportunity to somehow work in those pilots that decided to bypass the flow, in some cases once, in some cases twice, we will look to do so, but I obviously can't guarantee that. Now, if Delta comes to us and says, we have a seniority-based system for you, but we also want things out of your contract, well, then that's a different conversation. Because we can then say, we understand that, but if we make some contractual changes or we do another contract extension, then that is going to change the working conditions for the pilots that are going to be sunsetting their careers here. And what do we see, or what value do we see, and what can we achieve for that subset of pilots? So there's always a possibility to do something like that. But I do want to somewhat try to dispel this idea that we're going to get a seniority and longevity-based system and American airline pay rates all in the same negotiation. I really don't see that happening. Okay.
Yep. I'll take this next one. This is from Atlanta FO, George Von Edwins. First and foremost, thanks for everything you do for us. Keep up the good work. Hey, we appreciate that. We do what we can. Some days are shorter than others. That's what I'll say. It seems like I spend a few hours every month combing through my Rainmaker to make sure the company isn't shorting me. Have to correct their mistakes, always in the company's favor. I was wondering if there was anything that can be done about the consistent errors the company makes in Rainmaker. Well, we know a couple errors that the company has put out with the times not matching. They said it was an update that went wrong, and their inability of trying to fix it, hopefully with the next update. But we always tell pilots to go back in the Rainmaker and make sure everything is caught and your pay is what it's supposed to be. It's human error. Sometimes mistakes are made. Yes, sometimes it goes in their favor. We have seen it go in the pilot's favor also. So yes, continually check it. I would check your Rainmaker and make sure you're getting paid correctly.
Yeah, and remember, Rainmaker is a software system, so it can only be as good as the programming. And as our contract changes, so do the needs of those programming changes. And so when we do see errors, we do try to bring those up to the company, and they will work with. I think it's actually CAE is Rainmaker's vendor now.
Now it is.
Yeah,
CAE,
now it is instead of Sabre.
owns
So, and that's what caused that software glitch. Is CAE pushed out an update, and it actually made our system worse. So they had to go back and retroactively fix that. As you see these types of errors, file FCRs on them and let the company know that these errors are happening, so that in software updates or reprogramming, we may be able to eliminate or at least reduce those errors.
Next email questions from Atlanta 900FO, Xavier Tharp. He says, I'd like to start this by saying thank you for all the work you put in towards bettering our quality of life here at Endeavor. Thank you for that. Does Delta and this says DAL, so I'm going to assume this is for the Delta management side and not the Delta MEC side. Does Delta management not see a seniority accrual system here at Endeavor as a recruiting tool to attract more pilots to the Delta brand? It is very hard to believe that pilots wouldn't be more inclined to come to Endeavor, knowing that while they are here, they'd be building seniority at Delta. There's a couple facets to this question. First and foremost, really at the end of the day, Delta Airlines itself as a whole likely will not ever see a significant problem recruiting and attracting pilots to come to Delta. It's the Endeavor portion of the brand that likely needs that recruiting help. So while, yes, that is absolutely correct that giving additional benefits such as a advanced seniority system down at Endeavor would help our attraction and ultimately in the end Delta's attraction, one of the main concerns that we've heard from Delta's management is that while this helps Endeavor's attraction, it would potentially negatively harm Delta's attraction ability. So again, they're not concerned with bolstering the ability of getting pilots cast in this net to come to Delta as much as they are concerned about potentially turning a pilot off from coming to Delta. One part of the conversations that we had a few months ago, initially regarding seniority and longevity, was that I forget if it was Jim Graham or someone else, but they were saying that essentially if there is another carrier that introduced a seniority and longevity system, that Delta wouldn't mind going down that pathway necessarily. However, Delta did not want to be the first to capitalize on that because they believe that would put them at a competitive disadvantage for pilots coming to Delta, not the other way around. With the rate of hiring right now, and granted the market can change really at any point in time, but with hiring right now in the range of maybe 150 to 180 pilots a month at Delta, the contractual and off-the-street pilots that we send really are a small sub 20%, sub 15% portion of that hiring. So putting more effort into help Endeavor attraction and recruiting while turning off the other 150 or so pilots from Delta to maybe look at another carrier where there's not going to be pilots coming in and leapfrogging them, so to speak, is something that Delta is concerned with. There's a lot of pilots that Delta believes may look at Delta as a lesser carrier if there's a continual stream of Endeavor pilots coming in and pushing you down the seniority list once you're already a pilot there. I don't think this is entirely an accurate argument, as right now we do have at any given time 60 pilots on the seniority list at Delta while still flying at Endeavor, so this leapfrogging system is in place, so to speak. It's just on a much smaller scale by having these 3 months of flow pilots coming into Delta continually than it would be, say, 100, 200, 500 Endeavor pilot seniority numbers coming in.
Yeah, and one thing on that topic that I should probably tell the pilots, one of the things I said to Captain Burns was, we do have a problem here today, or at least we think that we have a problem here today if our goal is to stabilize and grow. And that's what we kept hearing from the company, from Endeavor during the retention talks, is we hope to do this to stabilize and grow. And now the mantra seems to be we're going to shrink and build back. And that's very, very different than stabilize and grow. And so what I told Captain Burns was we do have a problem here if the goal is to stabilize and grow. What we're talking about in the future is a possible problem. We don't know that it's going to be a problem, but we do know that we have a problem here today. So let's try to implement a solution that addresses that problem. And if there are downline problems, we'll address those solutions as well. This is what has led us to 131 letters of agreement inside 11 years. So I'll take the next one. New York City 900 First Officer Simon Doyle. Hello, Nick and team. Thank you for your continued commitment and furthering the rights and benefits of the pilot group. Could you please provide an update on Delta's contract negotiations, the remaining obstacles they have to resolution, and your best bet from talks with Jason Ambrosi as to when they may reach a settlement? I think our long-term future is closely aligned with gaining resolution of their contract, first for presentational reasons, as well as support of their pilot group. Simon, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to give you any specific answers. The progress that they make in Section 6, especially with specific areas that are either closed or remain open, are proprietary in nature to that MEC, and as such, they remain closely guarded secrets of the negotiating committee and of the MEC. Now, in general, Captain Ambrosi has informed me that they could to get to a deal within the next several weeks. It just depends upon the appetite of Delta. And what we're both hoping is that the need to solve a problem here that doesn't necessarily require more money coming down to Endeavor pilots, because that, in all fairness, will complicate Section 6 for Delta, and that can present some hurdles and challenges. We're hoping that will be able to close out the areas that remain open, so that, like I said before, Delta pilots can win, Endeavor pilots can win, and then the entire enterprise can win. So thank you for the question.
All right. This next question comes from Alana, 900 Captain Maxim Bevlo. If the company decides to negotiate a better deal, quality of life, maybe more money for the pilots that are flowing within 6 to 8 months, may not even fill new agreement, will you talk to the company about sticking to a second round of attention bonuses for those pilots who is flowing soon? In other words, will the last LOA bonuses stay in place? All right, so I think what we're trying to see
you left
is...
out the emojis, Jade.
I did. I missed the
It's,
emojis.
I believe
Thank-
peace sign, sunglasses, and airplane.
Yes.
For context.
Thanks for all your hard work. So, I think what we're asking is, are the bonuses going to stick around, or are we going to look at another second round of bonuses? Like Nick said in the beginning, right now the goal would be seniority longevity. Is there other solutions out there? Yes. We don't know if there's going to be a second monetary, what the offer may be. If we get those offers, then we can look at how does it play, what is it going to play. But for right now, what we've heard from the pilots in the past is the goal is seniority longevity as our number one solution.
Yeah, and let me expand just a little bit on that, because I know that he was saying that, if I'm flowing in the next 6 to 8 months and you guys, implement some contractual improvements, does that really positively affect me? Basically, I would like to personally see a higher bonus than I would like to see those contractual improvements. And here's the thing. We're not going to be able to target specific benefits to specific subsets of pilots like that, because there's no way that if we make a contractual rule change in the JCBA that we're going to be able to exempt you or exempt others from that, and instead you're going to get this over here. That's going to get far, far too complicated. So even for somebody like myself, even if we are able to capture a longevity and seniority accrual system, it's not going to help me at all. I'm going to be on the roster at Delta starting November 1st. My class date's February 7th. So this won't help me at all, but it is still representative of what I think the vast majority of pilots are going to tell us that they want, and will keep them here through the contract surveys. And it also is going to represent really forging some new territory in the industry for ALPA, and I think that could be good for other carriers via pattern bargaining.
Next question is a email from New York 900 Captain Chris Lugo. He says, "Our operations fall apart if someone sneezes in the OCC." I have found the past 3 months to be brutal with the constant schedule changes. Even when the weather is excellent, a 19-hour overnight quickly becomes 10 hours, and awarded schedules are not maintained anymore with the magic words operational necessity. 10 hours of rest is now the goal and no longer the minimum amount of rest. It honestly feels like Delta and Endeavor are intentionally sabotaging our operation. I had a flight canceled due to lack of crew, even though my entire crew and I were operating in the aircraft, and we were going to be used on that canceled flight. Scheduling cannibalized our crew to go cover other flying.
Great word, by the way, cannibalized.
Yeah.
I like that.
Every crew member I know is working harder than ever and appreciated less than ever. This is only expediting attrition. I myself am 6 months away from a Delta seniority number and have considered leaving for another legacy airline because of the abusive conditions at Endeavor. Are there plans to improve our quality of life and prevent these fatiguing and abusive conditions? Endeavor continues to take on flying they know they can't cover. We're tired of these working conditions. And then there's a short part about a passenger
I was going to say, why don't we
interaction
just
here.
answer the question
Yeah.
from that point?
As far as plans to improve quality of life and prevent these really even before answering the question, I want to say this is something we are hearing far more often from pilots than we have, at least in any time that I've been on the MEC. I know our reps really in all bases are being brought these types of stories, these schedule meltdowns, cannibalizing, for lack of a better words, where pilots' schedules are, you're on pairing revision N before you even show up to work that day. This is obviously something that we've stressed to management on. If you want to retain pilots, if you want to keep pilot morale high, this is not how that's accomplished. Something like the trip rig moving up, the hospitality suites, the crew room food, these are things that our management views as, doing little things that they can to try and show that there's some goodwill that they're trying to extend to the pilots, but obviously that quickly gets reversed when you're out on the line. As far as plans to improve our quality of life and prevent these fatiguing and abusive conditions, a high priority within the MEC negotiating list is to get a overhaul of our fatigue program and bring it more in line with what Delta has right now. Whether or not the company will fully engage on that will be something to see during a future negotiation, but that has been towards the top of our list for some time now. As the JCBA is written right now, there's sort of a wide swath that the company gets with your schedule from report time to 1 hour after your originally scheduled release on that last day. And they're really kind of using the full extent of the language here, which hasn't always been seen before. As far as Endeavor taking on flying that they know they can't cover, we've seen this as well. It seems like the schedule has been a little bit dampened from what it was originally supposed to. Typically, you'll see a sort of pull down in the schedule as flying cools off at the end of the summer and as the return to school happens. That's not really the case this year because we are seeing a slightly pulled down July and August, which results in sort of a constant going into the fall, whereas normally you would see a reduced schedule. They have already cut that after an overly ambitious June and May, which led to the lower performance numbers at Endeavor. There's some additional questions here on essentially passenger and crew interactions. To sum it up in a few words, has ELPA noticed more frequency in passengers negatively interacting with crew members? This, I don't really see those types of emails coming through. It's, I'm not going to say it's something that never happens. Everyone has a bad day at work or a bad day at the airport, but really from a protecting yourself standpoint, I always tell people, if this is something that you do encounter, just disengage, walk away. If you're not, a company rep or an ELPA rep and you're not ready to answer one of those questions or to have that sort of interaction with a passenger where you're, presenting facts and that sort of thing on why maybe this delay happened or why you got into this situation, I wouldn't obviously recommend having the rest of that conversation. It's better to step away and, I've seen people throw a cup of coffee on the side of the airplane because their flight got canceled and they needed to go from New York to wherever and back, and that didn't happen, and it's somehow the crew's fault that thunderstorms came in. It's these kinds of things happen when you're at work, and it's just best to sort of remove yourself from that as well. And one thing we do see as well too, Delta keeps a very tight control over their social media policy. You don't want to have a sort of off-the-cuff comment to a passenger or customer that ends up being quoted in Business Insider or Flying Daily or whatever the Facebook flying blogs are that like to eat up those sorts of interactions.
Yeah, and Chris, I will say I haven't personally seen any, I would say more or less negative interactions between pilots and passengers. And when I say more or less, these are not things that we see often, at least on the MEC level, unless they're brought to us directly by the pilot. I do know that over the pandemic, as we all do, that there were a lot of interactions between flight attendants and customers over various issues such as mask mandates. I think obviously with the masks being removed, a lot of those have subsided, and we're not seeing necessarily any issues again other than the one that you just raised. The other point that I will make when we talk about what are we looking at as far as limiting the abuse of these schedules? The fatigue program is one, but the fatigue program doesn't prevent abuse. It just gives you a mechanism to try to rest from that abuse. we are taking a look at different things in the industry and different things that you guys are going to want. And again, I'm going to make another plug for the survey. This is why you should complete the survey. As far as things that we could do to try to limit that abuse on reroutes and reschedules, or if it is necessary, is there a financial disincentive for the company and a financial reward for the pilot? I mean, all of these types of things are, on the radar. But like Adam said, and everyone has said, we completely understand all the challenges that are out on the line right now. The company is using Section 25, including extensions, junior assignments, and BYDs to extents that we have never seen before. In fact, did we pull the BYD data today?
For July, the BYDs, essentially the lost days off among the pilot group, it was 172 for the month of July by itself,
So
compounding the other several 400 or 500 from the rest of this year.
Yeah, so I mean, if we really just go March, April, May, June, and July, you're probably looking at just shy of 700, like 675, 680, 690, somewhere around there with junior assignments, extensions, and BYDs. And that is something that is completely unsustainable. That is something that we talk to the company every single month about, and sometimes several times a month. So it is definitely on our radar, and we'll continue to champion that message.
And that's, I believe we've touched on this on a Friday update a few times recently, but if you do encounter this delay into a day off, there's kind of two subsets of language. There's your Section 25, which in 25L something, where if you're released after 1700 in domicile from a extension, BYD, that sort of thing, where it
25
entitles...
I-9.
That's the one, where it entitles you to that compensatory day off. However, also one aspect that seems like a lot of pilots don't necessarily know is that you are ultimately still entitled to your minimum days off under Section 12E. So if you were a reserve pilot, your schedule is going to be built to the minimum number of days off. If you were BYD'd then into a day off, you are entitled to get a comp day later in that month or the next month, depending how many days are left. Same thing if you were a line holder, if you ended up with 15 days off somehow, and you chose to pick up a 5-day trip, for example, this would put you under your min days off for the month, whether that was something you voluntarily did by adding that trip and then you were later extended into a day off any other point in that month, that does also qualify you for a comp day. This is your contractual right. If you pursue it through crew scheduling and you have any sort of pushback, that's where the grievance committee comes in and we try and remedy that process for you.
And if you're wondering what the parameters of a compensatory day off and how to use one, that's covered in 25L6.
That's the one I was trying to
Yep.
rattle off originally.
Quite all right. I knew where you were going. All right, now we're going to go on to the call-in questions. Please clarify. Actually, people are allowed to call in just to listen, but if you'd like to ask a question, it's *1. All right, let's go on to the callers in the queue.
Hey, Captain James. Cameron Sebring, First Officer here in New York City. Just had a quick question about how you think the meeting went. Was Delta responsive to you guys having the meeting? Did they seem like they wanted to be there? Just kind of curious about that, or do they seem kind of like they were forced to be at that table?
Well, it really is kind of an interesting perspective. I don't know that they feel like they were forced to be at the table. Certainly, they understand the value that Endeavor drives, and so every time I've asked for a meeting, I've been able to get one. I really haven't been denied on that. But at the same time, do they really believe that there is a problem that needs to be solved? And if they do need to solve it, is seniority the system that they want to solve it with? That is something that I am very unclear on and very unsure on. Patrick Burns did seem to have some level of interest, but I can't say that it was a high level of interest. And even though that we are shrinking on the Endeavor side, there doesn't seem to be any urgency in Delta or Endeavor's part to find some type of solution such as this. Again, whether it's seniority or something else. And when we pose the question of, okay, if seniority is not the answer, what is going to be the answer? There were no alternatives given. So, sometimes you got to read in between the lines on what is being said. Like I said, I don't think that they had a problem with taking the meeting, but they didn't seem to be full speed ahead as far as finding a solution.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Very welcome. Go back to email. Okay. Remember, if you'd like to get in the queue, press *1.
You guys are shy tonight. Usually that's the kind of the wild cards of these calls are seeing what exactly happens on the phone line.
All right. The next question comes from Atlanta 900FO, Matt Mulkin. Hi, team. Where does ALPA stand on extending the age 65? I'd guess that the body of us are opposed to it, but I'm sure some have 63-year-old that are in favor. ALPA put out a email a couple weeks ago coming out against the age 65 and extending it. So that's where their current stance is. There was several reasons, including health. If you want to get on ALPA's email list, make sure you go to the membership if you're not getting those emails from ALPA National, and update your email to make sure you're getting sent the current emails. But that is what they've said. They've come out against the age 65 at this time, and there was a full list. It was 3 or 4 pages long on that email that you can read into it.
Yeah, it was pretty extensive. Nick and I were out in D.C. back in May during the executive board when that resolution was passed. From my recollection, it was unanimous across all of the ALPA MECs. At that time, JetBlue was the abstaining carrier, and it was not that their MEC chair, Chris Kenny, was personally opposed to the resolution to prohibit extending past age 65, except that he was wanting to poll his membership first before voting affirmatively. But it was overall a essentially unanimous vote among the ALPA MECs to not have any sort of extension past age 65. There's also currently a call to action on the ALPA website for that. It's essentially a pre-generated form that ALPA does from time to time where if you click on that, it takes the data that's in your ALPA profile and sends a sort of canned letter to your U.S. senators based on the state that you live in, as well as your representative district, just stating essentially the ALPA national position on why they are not interested in seeing an extension past age 65. There's a follow-up question on here. With multiple months where attrition has exceeded onboarding, how long do you expect the company to sustain existence? Well, this is a pretty open-ended question. As far as from a entirely mathematical standpoint, without guessing too much, if we've been, in the worst case, losing over 70 a month, even if we saw that go up towards 80 or 90 a month while still onboarding 50, it would take a significant amount of time to see a net attrition loss. Obviously, for the pilots that were still around here before my time necessarily in the 2013, 14, 15 era where there was a mass exodus, so to speak, from Endeavor, you saw several months in a row with above 100 a month attrition while not really getting anybody in the door behind, which led to a lot of time of Nick being last on the seniority list for a few years. These types of numbers were...
Are you trying to give me PTSD again?
Well, it's worked out for you so far well enough, I guess, staying around. But these types of, mass exodus type numbers where you see 3-digit attrition with really 0 to a handful in the door is not something we're experiencing right now. One thing that's maybe keeping that a little bit more in check is that at the American Wholly Owns with their new pay rates, they are aggressively seeking the direct entry captain or near entry captain pilots at those properties. And there's been pretty widespread reporting, at least from some of the pilots in our new hire classes here as well, that these American Wholly Owns are not as interested in taking the 1,500-hour CFI or Part 135 pilots at their carriers as they're trying to bolster their direct entry captain ranks. At the point that they kind of tap that well dry, I think you will see a lot less interested new hire candidates coming to Endeavor, and that's just going to put additional pressure on some sort of negotiated benefit at our property. So while how long will we stay in existence? That's I don't think possible to answer really, to put a finite date on it. Hopefully, longer out than any pilot on the seniority list, all 1991 of us have a opportunity to exercise guaranteed and contractual career progression or stay behind if you wish. But there would be a significant amount of shrinkage and attrition to get below the point where Endeavor can't be a functioning airline.
All right, the next email comes from Atlantic 200 Captain Richard Sprague. This is a two-part question. Richard writes, I have read in several places that 9E is shrinking, but shrinking more slowly than SkyWest or Republic. Could you reconcile how SkyWest DCI flying seems to be steadily increasing, while 9E's flying, Endeavor's flying, decreases? Remember, this is a company talking point. We, on the association side, we really don't have any direct line of sight into the operation of Republic or SkyWest in those regards, because it's a Teamsters and non-union property, not an ALPA property. Whereas the company, because they have capacity purchase agreements with these various other carriers, they are going to have a little bit more information and insight onto that. Also, keep in mind that Republic and SkyWest fly for all of the competitors, so United and American as well. And so it is possible that there may be some drawdowns on some of the UAX sides or the American sides, and that may help bolster something on the Delta side. Also keep in mind, too, that as one of the things that is going to expose or present some risk exposure to the non-wholly owned American carriers is pay rates like these really need to be done on an economy of scale. If you're going to pay outsized compensation at Piedmont, PSA, and Envoy, it really makes sense to bring all of that flying in-house. And I don't know currently what is happening on the American side of the operation with respect to Republic or SkyWest, but there could be already some shrinking occurring, and the excess pilots could be supporting the Delta system. It's all speculative because, again, we don't really have great line of sight for the aforementioned reasons. Second part of this question, would Delta even consider having Endeavor fly the currently parked 700 or 900 aircraft, plus additional 900s coming off lease at SkyWest with the current staffing in lieu of 200s? Well, of course, they absolutely could. But again, the only thing that they are required to do is operate 109 dual-class aircraft here. Something that I pitched to the company at Tuesday's ops meeting when we were talking about the state of Endeavor and the outlook of Endeavor. I said, stability means a lot to the pilots. That's why pilots will not, traditionally hang their hat for a career at a regional airline industry, because as, everyone knows, unless you own your own aircraft and you sell your own tickets, there's always a risk exposure involved. And so does it make sense if we are going to be a larger airline, which we continuously hear Endeavor say we want to be larger, and Delta is willing to operate 130, 140, 150 dual-class aircraft, does it make sense to just make those part of our fleet guarantee? Commit those aircraft to Endeavor, but most specifically, commit them to the pilots of Endeavor. And then allow the pilots of Endeavor, through that meaningful action from Delta, to show that Delta has a commitment to this carrier and to our brand. I don't know that I really got anywhere on that other than just making a pitch, but certainly there's always a possibility of something like that occurring.
If Delta is not interested in a long-term solution for a short-term problem, why are they not interested in what AA wholly owns did?
It was expensive.
That's
really
that's the most.
They like money.
Yeah.
There's kind of some. You got to understand that Delta is also in Section 6, and the Delta pilots are going after money. So that a type of money that was given to the American wholly owns was significant. I think me and Nick ran just rough numbers, and it was over $1 billion over several years.
I think between the three carriers, $1.5 billion.
Yeah, and you're talking parking that huge amount of money. Now that was all three. That's going to take away from Delta pilots what they can do. We weren't interested in. I don't think Delta's interested in parking that type of solution down here at this time. That's a significant amount of money. We go after some of the money coming out of Delta pilots, which, again, you got to remember, we have to work together as a team to come up with one solution. And if you're taking away from one part of the team, it does hurt the other part. So working together for a whole solution where you're not harming one or another class is kind of the ultimate goal.
They also know that parking a monetary solution here, while yes, it is a better short-term solution, is also going to draw the ire of the Delta pilots as they still have their Section 6 negotiation open. And they are acutely aware of that, and that's going to be something that they're going to consider too. So now, is it possible they close out Section 6 without a seniority-based system and then they're a little bit more free or less constricted to do something down here? Sure, but we'll just have to see what they do.
Next up is a text question from New York 900 Captain Alex Marquardt. I was looking over the newest ISL. Why was there not a July 25th new hire class? That is a very good question. Classes are full until fall, right? That's the line that we keep hearing repeated.
So they're matching the classes to the current captain
Yeah.
status. So we could actually see another class that gets missed in August or September because of the current staffing levels with captains. So as captains go through differences and upgrade, they are matching how many pilots they're bringing on as new hires to our current staffing levels on the captain's side. So they're looking anywhere between 10 and 16 per week. And if they bring in 16 for 3 weeks, they might not need the last class because it can vary between the two. So it all depends on what they're looking at for current staffing on the captain level side.
All right, the next question is from Detroit 900 First Officer Connor Fall. Connor writes, do you feel that your meeting with Delta and Endeavor and Delta Alpha provided any positive movement or feedback? I think the positives that we can take out of this is putting everybody in the same room. There is value there. And hearing directly, and by hearing, I'm talking about Jim Graham and Patrick Burns, hearing directly from Jason Ambrosi, I think is valuable in him saying, we do think that there is a possibility that the Delta MEC can get on board with a solution. We need to know what that solution looks like before we can fully commit to it, but we do think that there is an avenue for progress. We also think that it's best served or best done inside a Section 6 negotiation and helping us close out Section 6, which is beneficial for Delta pilots and also beneficial for Delta management. I think it was helpful to hear that. I think from our end, it was also helpful for Patrick and his side to hear that if you do have some concerns, such as we don't want to park a 10-year solution when we may have a 2 or 3 year problem, hearing us say, that's okay. If that is your concern, we can absolutely moderate the solution that we're going to put down here to address that need. We can also take a look at how different accrual systems would work to address your concern of possibly not being competitive in the pilot labor market with where some of your other pilots are coming from through the pipelines. A willingness to show movement or some type of other negotiated solution that addresses their concerns is the way that you get deals done. So I would say that that is positive from the meeting. I would say that it could potentially also be positive if we hear back from Patrick and his side in the next couple of weeks as to a desire to create another meeting with an expanded table and with the idea that we were going to go in there to really start rolling up our sleeves and get to work on some type of solution, whether it's seniority or otherwise. But that is going to be for the next couple of weeks, and time will tell. All right, we have callers in the queue. You're on air with the chair.
Hey, good evening, y'all. This is Benton Matthews, Cincy 900 captain. Y'all can't hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'm recently back to the line after a long OE wait. I feel your pain, bud. But from the outside looking in, it seems like New York IROPS are worse than they were when I was an FO. And the blame always seems to be pushed onto the airlines, and they don't talk, no one is ever talking about the role that ATC or the FAA is playing in causing the ground stops and asking the airlines to reduce their schedules. Is there anything that the association or the airlines or Endeavor or Delta is doing to try and maybe help the FAA along in correcting those issues, staffing issues? Because I think they're having the same issues with New York TRACON, New York RC, and Jack Center.
Yeah, the company came out a week or two ago after the one major meltdown on a clear day that said they are actually going in to talk to the ATC because of the meltdown and their shortage to see what better solutions they can come up with to help prevent some of those IROPS. They know that ATC, TRACON, the centers are all having issues with staffing just like every other industry is. So with that being said, they are going to try to work with those to see what they can do to provide a better solution, whether it's schedules, time, whatever it may be. But Delta definitely has said they have a high interest in trying to work with ATC to come up with some type of solution. What that is, we're not going to be in on those meetings, but it's well known of an issue, and they are going to try to work for a solution for that.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, no problem. Have a wonderful night.
You're on air with the chair.
Hey, do you got me?
Yeah,
Yep, we got you now.
Okay. Hey, this is Connor Fall, Detroit 900 guy again, FO side. Being a senior FO, as much as I could say, did you guys get any idea of a time frame from the meeting today about maybe when the negotiations would go into effect? Because within my age and that sort of thing, looking at other companies as well as where I live is a lot more beneficial to me. But if the timeline matches up, I'd like to stay at Endeavor and follow through the Delta company. But how's that timeline look?
Yeah, that's something that I tried to push for, Connor, at that meeting was, hey, can we secure a date for our next meeting with an expanded table? And what Patrick wanted to do is he wanted to circle back with Jim and just kind of speak with Jim one-on-one about what the next steps for their team is going to be internally before he committed to anything. Both Jason and I did highlight the need to be expedient inside that process. And so we're unfortunately kind of in a wait and see pattern. And one of the things that I'm going to be careful of and this team is going to be careful of is, and I did highlight this with Patrick on the call, is that we don't want to create any type of false expectations, i.e., any type of carrots. If we're going to sit down and we're going to meet, it's going to be with the goal of finding a solution, because the last thing that I want to do is just keep saying, hey, we have another meeting, we're going to be discussing, we're going to be talking, we're going to be evaluating. Those types of things are not necessarily tangible actions that are going to result in something of value for your career if you wait. So what I want to make sure is that if you wait, you're waiting for something that is actually going to materialize. And so right now, the Magic 8 Ball is unclear.
That's a good way of putting it, Nick.
Best way I could put it.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Awesome. Thanks, guys. And shout out to Guy. Appreciate it. Thanks.
There he is.
Oh, we have one more caller? Okay, sorry. You're on air with the chair.
Hey guys, I just called in, but I think I just got the beep. My name's Truman Stewart. I'm a Detroit 200 captain. It seems like Delta is a very financial numbers-driven company. As much as we'd like to think that because we're Endeavor, we're going to get something because we're the gold standard. Is there any way to just give or align all of our desires with their Section 6? So just kind of, instead of talking with the company, talk with the Delta MEC and just stuff it into their contracts, just kind of like the way all bills in Congress are. You just kind of sneak it in there. Is there any way to do that? That seems kind of like a sneakier way to do it, but a way that the numbers might work out for them so we don't have to bargain against them.
I want to make sure that I answer your question fully, Truman. When you say bargain against them, are you talking about against the Delta pilots, or are you talking about against Delta management?
I guess we're always bargaining against Delta management, but I guess against their pilots. It sounds kind of like that they don't want to give in, even if they know deep in their heart that this is the right option, that seniority would probably fill classes for all of eternity. Just kind of put it into their contract. Is that even realistic? It sounded like Delta MEC was all for it.
Yes. So again, the position of Jason Ambrosi and the Delta MEC is they would like to see all regional flying done by Delta pilots, and they would like to take the aircraft and the pilots here and attach them to the Delta seniority list. That is their number one goal. Short of achieving that goal, they are willing to entertain some other types of solutions like an advanced seniority and longevity accrual system. However, in order to unlock that, they need to see some value inside their Section 6. They're on board for it, but they also need to get something for it because their pilots are going to want something for it. Remember, everything is going to be hinging on the Section 6 because all of the big three all the big three contracts are open, and that includes United, American, and Delta. And all of them are looking to get some fairly significant gains. And so if they can achieve those types of gains, then there really isn't any need or reason to slip it in. It will absolutely be noticed by the Delta MEC as it should, and it will be noticed by the Delta pilots as it should. But what you say is, yes, we're going to allow Endeavor pilots to accrue seniority and longevity for a period of time, but in exchange, we have achieved ABC, XYZ for the Delta pilots. And so everybody is creating that win-win scenario. And then once that is unlocked, then Delta has the ability to say to Endeavor, go to the Endeavor MEC and find a way to construct a deal at that level. If that level just includes them parking a seniority-based system here, that's wonderful. That's going to be very easy. If they're going to look to try to claw back some value that they paid to the Delta pilots through our contract, that's going to require more time and a different conversation and maybe more things than just a seniority-based system. So we'll have to see how they want to proceed on that.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys.
You're welcome, Truman. Oh, do we have another caller? Oh. You're on air with the chair.
Hello, hi, this is Captain Richie Brown, 900 Captain, New York. How are you today?
Good, Richie. How you doing?
Oh, good. I sent an email, but I guess you can disregard my email now because I'll ask my question live. First of all, great job, guys. You guys doing a nice job. Appreciate everything you do. My question is, you said earlier in this broadcast that the Delta MEC said he would like to bring all the planes and people onto property. Did he also say, or did he mention how that would happen? Does he want us to go to the bottom of the list, so-called staple? And my next question would be, to follow up on that, would be, are there laws, ALPA bylaws or something that govern when two seniority lists meet or something like that?
You're talking about ALPA merger policy. Yeah, you're talking about ALPA merger policy. So first of all,
yes.
Yeah, no, we didn't talk about any specifics on how that would happen. And yes, there is an ALPA merger policy out there. And if we got to that point in time, we would obviously absolutely review that. There are ways, obviously, to incorporate this. And yes, there are laws out there. I think you're referencing the McCaskill bond issues. There are ways to incorporate the Endeavor pilots to the Delta list. What I will tell you, and I want to make sure that I'm clear again on this, what I will tell you is there is not going to be a possibility of us carrying our current or previously accrued seniority and longevity over to Delta. In other words, I understand you may have been here for 25 years, but you're not going to leapfrog a 25-year captain at Delta. That's just not going to be possible or feasible. So there is a way to actually put us at the bottom of the list via a staple. I won't get into all the details tonight because we have a long way to go before we would even possibly get to there. But that is just Delta's number one goal. But keep in mind that even though that might be the Delta MEC's number one goal, Delta management isn't even sure that a seniority-based system is necessary. And so if they're not even sure that a seniority-based system is necessary and incorporating everybody from Endeavor into Delta via a staple is up here and your seniority-based system is down here, I don't really see them looking for a solution that is going to be more expensive for them. I'm thinking that they're probably going to go to a solution that's less expensive for them.
Okay. All right. Thanks for answering that. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
How are current attrition rates of, this is from 900 Captain Derek Lagasse. How you doing, Derek? He's sitting right in front of us. How are current attrition trends affecting the function of the MEC? Do you need more pilots to step up and get involved? Yeah, the short is all of our committees are turning over. We're consistently seeing attrition with every single one of our committees. We're putting out in the Friday updates, please read if you want to be involved, that you need to reach out. We'll get you in touch with any one of those committees. If you want to figure out which committees or what's about each committee and you kind of want to learn more, reach out to that committee chair. You can get all that information on the EDV website. But yes, please, the short of it is, please get involved. As you can see, we introduced you to our EA who's been here, I don't know, 6 months or under, and we've already got her involved. So anybody that's willing to reach out, even if you're a probationary pilot,
It's been a long day.
It's already going downhill fast. Pilot, you can get involved. We are taking everybody that's willing to serve. We'll find a spot for you, see each individual person and find a fit. And please step up.
And before Adam reads the next question, I just want to say thank you to whoever emailed it as this individual. And I will say officially that I can either confirm or deny that I am group member. Adam, go.
Nick is definitely group member. Really quick before getting the email from a anonymous group member, I just really quick wanted to follow up on Jade's answer towards the attrition and volunteerism aspect. Like he said, if you're within your first year, if you're still a apprentice member and not fully off of your probationary term, while you can find a volunteer role, the elected positions, such as the two that are open right now in Minneapolis and New York, you do have to be out of your apprenticeship or probationary year in order to run in one of those elections. So you do have to be a full, active, and good standing member. Again, if you are a New York pilot, please vote in that election. If you're a Minneapolis pilot, please at least someone run in that election. We try not to ask a lot, but I am going to at least ask that much. And yes, if you're a probationary pilot and you want to be involved somewhere else in the committee structure of the MEC, we do put that in essentially every Friday update going on about the last year now, where we are seeking volunteers across various different positions. There's a interest form on our website that kind of filters you through into those in the areas that you're interested in. Of course, if you've been here maybe only 5 or 6 months, we might not immediately place you onto the negotiating committee or put you on the grievance committee where you're going to be going into arbitrations with the company. We want to see at least someone get out of their probationary year so they're a little more of a protected status. However, they're really, a lot of pilots have unique skill sets that they can bring into the MEC that they might not necessarily think of otherwise. So we really would love to have all the help we can get. And this is a bottom-up organization, and everyone else's efforts do contribute to the wonderful product that I like to think that we put forward for everyone. Back to group members' email. How does Delta, and I'm going to assume this is Delta management, how does Delta benefit from us shrinking? Doesn't this put Delta as a whole at a competitive disadvantage when the AA regionals are able to attract pilots and staff appropriately going into the future? Wouldn't the staffing advantage offset any harm done into mainline recruiting? Nick touched on this just a little bit earlier, in that really Endeavor and Delta Connection as a whole is a much smaller portion of the Delta feed. They've got more capable aircraft of upgauging and replacing that regional flying. So while they may see a negative impact towards a smaller Endeavor or Delta Connection, I should say, they overall are more equipped to handle that shrinkage on the Endeavor side. If you look at the United aircraft that they have, the smallest aircraft right now would be the 319. It's oftentimes, you'll do the LaGuardia to Syracuse flight and you park your 900 right next to a 319 because they don't have a mainline aircraft that can fit that void right now, and they don't seem interested in that 100 to 140 seat aircraft segment. American, they had the 190s. They chose to get rid of those. It seems like in the short term, that's hindsight 2020, not the best decision for keeping their smaller route segments intact. However, that's the direction that they went, and now they're needing to rely more heavily on their regional feed because of it. When you look at the total scope allowances across the three mainline legacy brands, Delta Connection is the smallest by far. From dual class aircraft, I believe it's a max of 325 from the Delta Connection side. That number is closer, if not above 500 for both the United and American side. Additionally, American Airlines has a larger scope limit for their large regional jet aircraft of 79 or 80 seats. Delta has that in a smaller segment of 76 and 70 seat aircraft. And even American, they can fly a Embraer 170 with 65 seats in it, and that counts the same or the equivalent to what a Delta CRJ 200 with 50 seats in it, with 2 blocked off for weight and maybe 4 more blocked off if you need an alternate that day. So they have essentially more regional aircraft at their disposal, and they're rely more on that feed than Delta does. So a shrinking Endeavor or Delta Connection is more easily brushed off by mainline than it would at a United or American equivalent.
All right, thanks, Adam. Our next question is from Minneapolis 900 First Officer James Yoger. James writes, did you get the sense that Delta is leaning towards a shorter-term seniority program that they would want to implement ASAP to shore up our current seniority list in this environment, rather than a long-term solution that would soon be irrelevant within the ever-fluid pilot market? And there's a second part of this question. I will just answer this part of the question. Delta right now sees their staffing issues as maybe a 1 to 2 to possibly at the most 3-year issue. And why is that? I've talked about this before. What is driving this kind of insatiable demand right now are 3 separate things. Number 1, growth, which is really being experienced more by the national carriers than it is the mainline carriers. But we're starting to see some trends that are opposite to that, including orders for the 220, the 737, and the A320 at Delta. Not all of those are growth aircraft. Some of them are replacement aircraft. But just like network planning always does, the vast majority could end up being growth aircraft if they say, hey, you know what, we have the pilots and we have the staffing to be able to do this lift, and there is customer demand out there. So when we talk about the short-term solution versus the long-term solution, they don't want to park a solution here that is going to be concurrent with our JCBA that's going to run through 2030 when they think that they may only need to shore up this for the next 2 or 3 years because of that growth, because of the pilot retirements, and because of the VOPs. Once they backfill for those early outs, they do feel like they're going to be able to handle the normal amounts of attrition, and then at that point, they're going to be able to start growing. Whether that happens in 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, it's kind of a crystal ball. But at that point, they're going to think that they're going to be able to grow. And do they still want to then commit to a seniority-based system? That's why we said, hey, look, if you want to talk about a seniority-based system that eventually meters down or meters off, we can absolutely do that. But I did make the pitch and wanted them to remember that in the American Airlines deal, one permanent part of their contract that does not go away is the fact that if you have not flown to American Airlines in 5 years, you go to the top of their pay scale. Whether you're a captain or a first officer, you're going to the top of the captain pay scale at $150+ an hour. So if American Airlines is going to back up their advertisement of we'll get you to American Airlines in 5 years, and if we don't, we're going to incentivize you or protect you at least monetarily, doesn't make sense for Delta to do the same thing. Yes, seniority may be turned off, but if we don't flow you in 5 years, you get a seniority number. So when they advertise a 5-year flow, you have some protection. That's something that we pitched and proposed today. Now, the other side of the question is also, is Delta aware of the inherent unfairness that Delta Connection pilots are experiencing based upon the prejudice to not interview and meter us and instead gulp up as many American Airlines and American Airline fee for departure pilots as they can? You know, Delta has received a lot of backlash and negative, I say negative press. It really hasn't gotten out in the press, but a lot of backlash, from the pilots that have been metered, many of which have, fathers or mothers that are currently flying for Delta, and their parents have reached out to the chief pilots and said, hey, we don't really think that this is consistent with the brand and the expectations. We need to be taking care of our future aviators if you really want them to buy into the Delta brand. Obviously, they've received some negative feedback from off-the-street hires here at Endeavor to say, well, I don't know that I want to make Endeavor my carrier of choice because I want to go to Delta and this is not the fastest pathway. Yes, it's a guaranteed pathway, but it's not the fastest pathway. Makes more sense both economically and for my career trajectory to go to Piedmont, PSA, or Envoy because I can make more money than I can at Endeavor and I don't risk the metering. And if things don't work out with Endeavor, I at least have a flow to American Airlines. That is value. So yes, it is unfair, and they have realized that, and so that they have unmetered those pilots, but they are still going to meter the interviews because at the end of the day, that protects their business and that protects their operation. And this is why I've always said you also need to make decisions that are best for your personal business and your personal operation.
All right. This is Detroit 200 FO Jake Duell. As a new hire FO placed in the 200 and the plans of the company to significantly reduce the number of 200s in operation by the end of the year, has the company engaged with any solution to keep the 200 drivers flying? What about displacements or dual qualifications? So we'll break this down. There's kind of three different options here. With the 200s, if they're going to reduce them by the end of the year, they have several different plans that can happen. As always, they have 5 or 6 plans that they kind of talk about. It all comes back to Delta and how much flying does Delta want to give us and how much flying can we do. If they were going to reduce the flying, then we would see a realignment. That realignment could be displacements, it could be many different things, but that is an option that they can do. With the dual qualification piece, we did agree upon when we did the last 2 LOAs, LOA 130 and LOA 131, with the company to talk about a possible dual qualification solution. There is an MOU out there that we did agree with it. They haven't come forward any time recently and said, now's the time we want to talk about that dual qualification piece to dual qualify all pilots, similar to what you would see at like a SkyWest. At that time, it kind of sits waiting for the company to see if they want that solution or if we're going to go to that solution. But at this time, we haven't formally started that negotiation.
All right, the next question is from Atlanta 900 Captain Christopher Woods. Good afternoon, guys. My question is for Nick. How long was the meeting today? It was 45 minutes. It was scheduled for an hour. It lasted 45 minutes. Also, what is the company's updated timeline for the 200? I'm not entirely sure what you're talking about as far as the timeline for the 200. If you're talking about maybe shrinking or a retraction or potential growth, not really clear on that one. I do know that the company is planning on continuously parking the 200 if staffing dictates that. We've heard in the past that they want to fly as many hauls as possible, but it is going to be predicated on staffing, and if they are going to sacrifice a fleet, it is going to be the 200. We have not been told that there are plans to permanently park the 200 yet. That is not something that the company has indicated to us. Rather, we're just going to shrink until we have the ability to grow back. That is the information that we have and can share at this point.
Next email question comes from Minneapolis 200 Captain Adam Liston. It's a 2-part question, so I'll answer the first part and then the second. If we come to a deal with all 4 parties involved, what does the Delta MEC get out of it? Meaning, are they holding any bargaining equity to it, or are there any strings attached to help us out?
Well, they get all of us.
Yeah, all of our lovely shining faces to come help out. As Nick gets roped into ALPA work at Mainline, approximately 6 months on property. You can't stay away. Anyway, well, what the Delta MEC gets out of it is the value that it costs Delta management to provide the seniority system. Essentially, if Delta management and their financial experts penciled it out, say for very easy math at $500 million to come out with a several years advanced seniority longevity system, in exchange, reasonably, the Delta pilots and the Delta MEC would want to see $500 million in quid coming out of it. Or is that the quo? Anyway.
That was a negotiator joke if I have ever heard one.
So essentially what the Delta pilots would be seeking is a equal value out of the cost of providing that seniority number. Longevity is something that potentially Delta's management, it kind of goes off 2 different directions where seniority and longevity impact the pilots and management differently. Your longevity obviously being your aircraft bidding, your upgradability, what domiciles you can hold. That's not something that I'm sorry, I said that entirely flipped. Your seniority is you're bidding the aircraft that you can hold and what domiciles you can hold. That is something that impacts the pilots that are currently on property, because you could come over from Endeavor with, say, 3 years of seniority and bid into a pretty decent wide body FO spot. You could bid into a narrow body, say 717 Detroit captain spot. There's a lot more tangible disruption that comes out of that seniority versus longevity. While it's incredibly expensive to management over the duration of your career, you earning a little bit more or topping out on the scale a little bit faster does not directly or tangibly harm the pilots that are currently on property. So in order to unlock these two benefits, there is a direct monetary cost to it, and it is fairly reasonable that the Delta MEC would be seeking to get something out of it. I wouldn't say that's a string attached by any means. I would just say that that is a MEC and a pilot group trying to extract value from a deal being placed in front of them. Second part of Adam's question, as Positive Space comes to an end this year, specifically after the October bid period, has the Delta MEC and Jason Ambrosi prioritized to keep it? Is there any update? Anything within the realm of bargaining and within Section 6 at Delta is, as Nick said, kept under lock and key. That's between their MEC and their negotiators. From a broad brush standpoint, I know this is a priority on their negotiating list. Whether or not it makes the final cut through Section 6 or a separate LOA, really only the future will see that. It's not great timing from an operational impact to have your Positive Space commuting end going into the holiday flying for November and December. Obviously, you see a lot of weather disruptions. You see some of the peak travel days of the year, and you're going to see a large number of pilots that have never had to commute outside of this Positive Space commuting provision. As of the last seniority list when we were looking the other day, we've just passed very close to the 40% mark of our airline that has been hired since March of 2021. With current attrition and hiring, that very likely will be past 50% of our airline hired within the Positive Space commuting provisions when they lapse as scheduled right now after the October bid month. So there's a very large segment of our pilot group, as well as a few thousand pilots at Delta, who have not had to commute to and from work without these benefits. Naturally, you will see a increase in pilots needing to utilize jump seats. You'll see likely more call-in honest or unable to commute type events, and this will cause a unintentional operational impact at Delta. That is the nature of your pilots not having a confirmed ticket to and from work, especially the to-work component. So whether or not that lands in their ultimate Section 6 deal, or if there is some sort of separate LOA or temporary extension, that remains to be seen, but it is a priority, and especially over the last 2.5 years of this pandemic, it's shown that even if you live in base and drive to work, you might end up a commuter at a moment's notice. So just because you don't currently need to utilize Positive Space commuting, whether unintentionally or you're chasing a different aircraft or seat that your domicile doesn't have, you really don't know when you might end up being a commuter. So there is value in this program, really, to everyone on property, in my opinion.
All right, looks like we're going to go back to the phone calls. You guys ready for the phone? Awesome. They're having too much fun back there. All right, you're on air with the chair.
Hello, can you all hear me?
We got you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm a new-based FO out of Cincinnati, and I keep hearing all this seniority and longevity is your guys' first and foremost intent. But part of me worries that at some point in time we'll be caught in like a catch-22 kind of style scenario where we'll be building this, but it doesn't actually mean anything. And if we're not actually like moving, or if like Delta slows down their hiring or meters us even further than they already are for whatever reason, is it going to wind up just being a completely moot point?
So here's what I would say. Remember, there are two components to this. There is the seniority longevity accrual, which is a benefit, and then there's the movement piece. And the movement piece is either LOA 125, the flow, LOA 129, which is the cap, or the off-the-street process. If Delta is no longer hiring because we've had a recession or there's a pullback, that's fine. Okay, at some point in time when they do begin to hire, you'll be able to use some of those movement programs that I just mentioned. So let me put a counter question to you. That could happen today, right? That could happen today. All of a sudden the industry could turn on a dime. We saw it at the start of COVID, right? It turned on a dime and it didn't restart for 18 months. Are you in a better position or a worse position as your seniority number sits and marinates if we get it versus if we don't have that type of system in place?
That's definitely a good point. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
One thing I would add to that as well is depending, obviously this is still hypothetical, if and when we are able to reach this point or ideally get a program like this in place, but under a advanced seniority and longevity program, your seniority would ultimately carry a seniority number as a Delta Airlines pilot. Yes, there may be some form of market correction or downturn where your future outlook at Endeavor is not as stable as it once was. But if you have a seniority number at Delta and you've been partially onboarded as a seniority list pilot, even if this property ceased to exist in its current form, there would be protections negotiated along with that seniority number to have a job for you ultimately. That's something that we've seen with our LOA 125 flow pilots is they're essentially onboarded and set aside in a holding bay, if you will, at Delta where they have their employee number, they have their login information. They are onboarded as a Delta Airlines pilot with a seniority number while still serving time down at Endeavor. And if the hammer dropped and we shut our doors tomorrow, there would be 60 pilots minimum, depending where the deck gets cut at this point in time, who would have those protected jobs at Delta. So there is a large career stability benefit in having that seniority number. Obviously, short-term perks like pay, benefits, quality of life are good, but there's only so much you can capitalize within a fee-for-departure contract short of having that stability of being at a mainline carrier. Something like a 16% direct contribution, 5-figure buy your new boat type profit sharing checks is just not something realistically that you'll see at a fee-for-departure carrier.
And not only that, if it does shut down, like Nick was saying, you're building longevity. So that capability, if it's sitting there shut down, you're still going to be building longevity. So you have the potential going over as your 3, your 4, your 5 pay whenever that hiring starts back up, instead of at year 1 pay where you're possibly taking a significant pay cut versus going over at an equal number or even higher. So that longevity piece also is significant. Even if you're not moving at that time, you're still being able to go over when you do go over, if you have that seniority piece, to go over at a higher compensation.
Yeah, all hypothetical until we reach those points in time.
Yeah.
But these are sort of the reasons on why this is on the forefront of our minds and why it's a priority for the MEC to see some form of this program be put in place.
All right, next question comes from Minneapolis 200 First Officer Dennis Morgan. Dennis writes, the chairman's update 2 weeks ago discussed some possible solutions such as increased premium pay, removing BDMs, etc., for all of the additional flying from network planning that is part of everything that is driving reroutes and BYDs. Has there been any response from the company regarding these proposed ideas? I will say not any positive responses. They are adamant that they do not want to do anything more than 200%, and their only reason for not wanting to do anything more than 200% is because it's not offered at Delta. And the counterpoint that I tried to raise with the company is that we need to be putting solutions that work for the Endeavor pilots. Our system might face different challenges and different pressures than the Delta system, and we need to put solutions forward that work for Endeavor. I also highlighted there's also some things that are different in our contract. We don't get a 16% direct contribution into a 401k, and they don't have 150% for all open time pickups. And so again, there are different solutions for different carriers, and we need to look for the solutions that are going to be right for our carriers. As far as, things like some of the other ideas that we propose, like removing the BDM codes or adding, deadheads in there, they say that they're doing those things, but we're not seeing those really en masse. What we are seeing en masse is BYDs, junior mans, and extensions. And really, that's how they're staffing their operation, by forcing you guys to work into your days off. When we did Section 25I, and whether you're talking about JAs, extensions, or BYDs, those were supposed to be for the one-offs, not part of the daily operation. And when our pilots are losing, like I said, 650 plus days off in 5 months, that becomes part of the daily operation. And that's why it's going to be a focus when we get into negotiations, if it's something other than a seniority and longevity based system, to take a look at some reschedule and work rule improvements.
All right. Next question comes from 900FO Mike Sitka. First off, thanks for what you guys are doing. I can upgrade, but I don't want to be New York or Cincinnati based. Moved here, live here, quality of life, etc. If captain shortage is EDV's biggest problem, why not upgrade in all bases? All of my trips are deadheads somewhere, and then I fly in and out of New York for the entire trip. So we're already doing New York flying anyhow. I think the company will have a lot of relief if y'all push them. I like y'all because I'm a Southern boy also. Y'all push them to open up more captain spots in all bases. So this is all based on network planning. Network planning allows them to say, hey, this is where our needs are for our captains or first officers for that. So as network planning drives where they need for economic scale, the cost, they're going to put the captains where they need them. And currently that's just New York and Cincinnati. You're right. It would be nice to open up spots everywhere, but because of network planning, they're going to probably put them where they need. And right now, the need isn't in Atlanta. It's still New York and Cincinnati. Until they get those bases built back up and we see the attrition in the other bases, then they'll probably start building back up the other bases.
Yeah, and one kind of cause and effect to that deadhead syndrome, so to speak, out of Atlanta right now. We've heard that from a number of pilots of why not open up additional captain spots? You just deadhead us to New York anyway. Really sort of the inverse is that Atlanta at this point in time for the flying that we've been allotted from Delta Connection, it is overstaffed. So a solution to that, a temporary solution to that overstaffing without having to displace pilots is to build more of the trips with deadheads. This was something that Minneapolis has experienced at various points in time. Cincinnati was experiencing it earlier this year. When you have a lack of flying in that base, it may be a cheaper and better morale solution to have these deadhead pairings versus outright taking those pilots out. Just for a very easy number, if you say a quarter of your pairings in Atlanta begin and end with deadheads to New York, on paper that means you have about a quarter too many pilots, which should be relocated to New York. And that would not sit well with a lot of people if that's the direction that the company goes. So it's sort of a short-term Band-Aid from that front. Up next, we have a text question from New York 900FO Daniel Morley. Is there data available from the American wholly owned carriers, either their MECs or management, that the new pay rates have slowed down their attrition rates? Daniel, it's funny you ask that because I do have that data, fortunately.
From a call maybe earlier today?
Well, it was United Express.
Oh, okay.
Yep. But I do fortunately have a working relationship with the other wholly owns through the position that I have at National. Out of the American wholly owns, Envoy specifically said they saw a minor slowdown. May they had over 100 pilots leave, whereas June was high 80s, low 90s. What they indicated is people are rethinking the Spirit or Frontier JetBlue type carriers, but those with the Legacy Class 8 are still going. And this is something similar that we saw when our retention bonus program came out. We saw a decrease to those low-cost or national carriers, while someone with a Legacy American, Delta, United job offer is obviously still pursuing that. PSA's data is typically a month behind. They only recently got their May data. That was a loss of nearly 90 pilots, which was consistent with their prior month attrition. And Piedmont has had a few pilots who opted to delay a close-in Legacy CJO, for example. If you're going to United in 2 months versus stay and make a ridiculous amount of money longer at Piedmont, there was some pilots who elected to do that. However, it's not been a drop off the face of the earth type of reduction in these pay rates. However, what it has done in all of these properties is it's driven a large desire much more so than Endeavor has experienced for the direct entry captain positions. Envoy and PSA particularly has had better luck with that, from my understanding, than Piedmont has. But Envoy is hiring significant numbers of direct entry captains right now, whereas I want to say we've had maybe sub 20 to date at Endeavor come in as direct entry captains, whereas that was expected to be a lot larger of a program here than it ultimately ended up being. So it's kind of different areas of the market that they're targeting with these pay rates.
All right, next up is New York City 900 First Officer Tommy Johnson. Tommy writes, "Hi, fellas. I have a class date at an LCC. I live in New Hampshire. Delta has had talks about a Boston base. Delta is my end goal. Although I am regretting losing the retention bonus, is it worth staying until a staple or something similar? I wonder if the LCC is JetBlue. I'm going out on a limb.
Could be Spirit.
Yeah, I mean, could be. Delta is going to have a Boston base. I mean, this is something that the MEC has said. This is something that Delta has said. Is it worth you staying here? I can't answer that question for you. None of us can. We don't know your personal situation. We understand that Delta is your goal. You can still get there via an LCC. They may ask you in an interview, or they may not want to interview you for a period of time if you leave Endeavor and proceed to an LCC. They may ask you why you left, and certainly you would probably have some very, very good answers and responses for that. But unfortunately, there's just not going to be enough information in here for us to fully answer it because it's such a unique question. What I would recommend is reach out to your LEC representative if you'd like to have a conversation on that. They can be reached through the ALPA phone tree at 833-EDV-ALPA.
All right. Atlanta FO, Nick. I'm not even going to...
That's why I gave you the question.
I believe it's Mark Antonio.
Mark Antonio? I was going to say that could go many different ways depending on what nationality.
You're Italian, Jade.
Yeah, I am, but that's why it could go many different ways. Does the company know how many of us live in or near Atlanta and need that as our domicile? I'm sure that they have the numbers, but that doesn't, like we've said just recently, that doesn't affect network planning. Because of the quality of life, that is why currently, like Adam said, they're building the structure the way it is instead of doing a realignment and pushing people out of there, is to try to give some of that quality of life there. We know that significant amount of our pilots are from that Atlanta area and would prioritize. But until network planning gives us more flying in that domicile, it is hard for us to build up those. As our desired quality of life considered in the big picture, or are we doomed to upgrade only in those most difficult bases and for commuters? That kind of answered with both of that. It's mainly based upon what network planning is going to give us. If they start giving us a bunch of Atlanta flying, guess what? We're going to build back Atlanta. As the time is right now, we're getting a lot of New York flying, so that's where you're seeing a lot of the upgrades going in. Cincinnati is the same way.
And one thing, too, for pilots to keep in mind, there is a bit of a history aspect to this. Our Atlanta base didn't open, or I should say reopen, until I want to say early to mid 2017. So there is a sort of byproduct of where the seniority falls among the bases. Minneapolis is another example of this, where you see the pilots that are hired at Endeavor wanting Minneapolis are generally speaking more senior overall than newer pilots wanting Minneapolis, because you know from your friends flight instructing, from people that you worked at Part 135 or in the military with, that Endeavor is known as being a senior Minneapolis base. This wasn't always the case with Atlanta, as they've tried to grow it up during the pandemic. We kind of were the only game in town, so to speak, and people came here for Atlanta. Well, if a lot of those pilots came here between 2016, 2017, and 2018 for the new Atlanta base, they've not yet reached the point where they have their contractual career progression to Delta. So even if Atlanta remained a constant-sized base and they eventually did start replacing pilots through secondary vacancies, you're not going to see the flow really start impacting Atlanta on the scale that it had with Minneapolis, Detroit, and New York even, until at least another 9 to 12 months from right now. Keep in mind with the last pre-merger pilot, whoever that is, once they flew to Delta in the February timeframe, that's when you start seeing the pilots hired in 2015 and 16, who are some of these Atlanta pilots, leaving. Right now, if really you want to stay in Atlanta and you don't want to go to an interim carrier, your choice is Southwest or Delta or staying here. So if you're sticking around to flow, that's causing that Atlanta sort of stagnation on the captain side. It's just really it's a byproduct as well of when pilots were hired at Endeavor and what our base structure looked like at the time.
The last pre-merger pilot?
Whoever that is.
Yeah, whoever that is. You have no idea?
I haven't checked the list in a while.
Yeah.
Nick.
Even though 40% of our pilots were hired under Positive Space.
Well, it's all math.
It's that guy.
Yeah.
A follow-up question that Nick asked was, I keep hearing seniority longevity system and longevity isn't free, but are the two items separable? Could we just get a seniority system? Wouldn't that come with no direct financial cost to Delta? There is still a financial component to seniority, though it is not nearly as extensive as longevity. If you think about it, if you walked in there with, let's say, 3 years of seniority at Delta, you are likely to immediately be able to bid to a wide-body first officer position, okay, which is going to come with different pay than a narrow body. It's also going to come with different pay if you're immediately able to upgrade to captain. And even if you're not able to immediately do those things, you're going to be able to bid for larger aircraft and more desirable positions in terms of financially desirable at a faster rate than you otherwise would have. So there is a financial aspect to seniority. It is just far, far less than what it would be just with longevity. Oh.
Group member. Did I miss something? What are the green lanyards for? Well, my green lanyard is different than those two green lanyards. My green lanyard is the new rep or MEC officer position lanyard. These are the Delta support lanyards that the new campaign is going for.
Yeah, so, Delta obviously wants a new contract, and as part of getting that new contract, they launched a green lanyard, just kind of like we launched an orange lanyard for Progression for All. And just to kind of show solidarity, I forgot, where did you get your lanyard from?
That was from the Minneapolis picketing at the end of June.
And I was actually recently down in Atlanta with Captain Ambrosi and the WestJet Encore guys, and I actually got my lanyard down there, and I asked Jason, hey, do you mind if I wear it just to show solidarity towards your goals up at Delta? And he said, absolutely. So thank you, group member.
It's probably easier for me to read it, and then we'll talk about who wants to take it. New York City, 900 Captain Ben Williams. What about EDV flying for Delta during the pandemic? And their paybacks and thanks, but no thanks. We're all regional
pilots.
We'll say that.
Of seniority, POS, that's what that stands for, right?
But are they hiring now as regional pilots from other pilots during the pandemic, trying to step on their neck during the pandemic when we kept their head above water? Is that the question? Reality being forgotten?
You read it.
I said
you can't pass that one.
Yeah, you read it.
I stepped on it. Thanks for the grenade. All right. So, yes, you're right. We did a lot of flying, keeping a lot of the bases open. And you are correct that there is a bunch of other regionals that are getting hired over us. I know the ultimate goal, from what I've heard from several management members, is that Delta eventually would like to only hire from Delta, from all their feed market. So eventually that's where they want to go. Right now, if they do that, they would just strive out the entire market and they wouldn't be able to have that feed at all. So right now it's not only us that's seeing that, but you're seeing American is also taking a bunch from everybody else. You're seeing United take a ton of our pilots just because you can't starve out your feed. So that's kind of the nature of the market that we're in.
All right. This next one is from Atlanta 900 First Officer Julian Orozco. It really has to do with Atlanta shrinking, and are we going to see more flying in Atlanta, specifically 900 flying, and many of the trips continuing to begin with a deadhead to New York. I think we've kind of beaten this horse a lot over this call right now. So Julian, if you'd like to take this offline, I would reach out to your captain rep, your first officer rep in Atlanta. Just contact them through the ALPA phone tree, 833-EDV-ALPA. We do have a couple more questions. Detroit 900 First Officer Spencer Sanders. It sounds like the pilot group is assuming Delta does want Endeavor to grow. What will it look like over the next few years if they don't? Well, again, this kind of goes back down to our fleet guarantee. We are contractually, or Delta has contractually committed 109 dual-class aircraft to Endeavor. They told us on a call today that the long-term plan for the DCI network is to operate 275 dual-class through 2030. So of that 275, we're contractually guaranteed to 109. So at a worst-case scenario, that is what Endeavor is going to look like. Now, from what they tell us that they want to accomplish is we may shrink for a while, but at some point when we've backfilled for the VOPS, when we can control growth, when we can control some of the other attrition, then we want to start growing back to some undefined number. And for pilots and for future MEC leadership, it's going to be very, very important to make sure that we put the fleet guarantee as part of that strategic objective so that we can continue to force Delta into making larger and larger commitments to the pilots of Endeavor. I've long said, and I know we don't have an industry-leading contract today as far as pay and benefits, but when we did, I've long said it doesn't matter to have an industry-leading contract if you haven't protected the jobs behind it. So that's why the fleet guarantee is going to be so very, very important.
Oh, group member. From
I don't know if he's
from left to right. I'm
Our left to
assuming
right?
they're basing off of
Probably-
on the camera's
yeah.
position. From left to right, what is each officer's favorite meme from the Facebook page? Just off the top of my head, I can't think of who posted it, but it was from I think Avengers Endgame, where all of the superheroes are flying in. And they had photoshopped in a bunch of orange staplers and lanyards and that sort of stuff. And it was all of the lanyards descending on the final Endgame flight. And that one did crack me up.
I've had I got to say, I've really enjoyed them, and I've actually gotten in on the meme game, as you guys have seen. But the one that made me laugh most recently is Morpheus, and What If I Told You group member is actually Nick James.
It is.
That was. I will tell you, I have never posted under group member. I've never posted anonymously, but that was well played. Whoever did that was good.
And mine's even easier because I don't even have Facebook. Yep.
Jade is the meme.
I am the meme. Yeah, so I couldn't even tell you
group
one.
member.
Yeah.
Seems like that's the final question.
Any callers in the queue? Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining the call tonight. For those that you were able to join live, and thank you for those that will watch the call later because you were out there working. We really, really do appreciate it. If you have any questions, reach out to the team, reach out to your reps, and we will be more than happy to answer everything that we can. As always, fly safe and be safe out there, and we'll see you out on the line. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.